Turn my mic on. Everyone, as a reminder, the red button means your mic is on. Welcome to this Water Resources Commission meeting, February 26th and 27th. We have a very special meeting planned this morning. As you can see, there's more of us here today than usual. We're going to start out with welcome and introductions. And Ivan, our director, Ivan Gall, will kick us off.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Gall, Director of the Water Resources Department. Good morning, Vice Chair, Commitment Chair. To share information and kind of inspire a discussion amongst staff and the commissioners on two very important issues here in Oregon, land use and water. The overlap of those two areas affects all Oregonians, our landscapes, our ecosystems, stream systems and waterways, and how we approach development here across the state. So it's a very exciting topic for us. Staff have a couple of presentations queued up this morning to help walk us through those overlapping areas there and again, get those conversations and questions going. Our goal is to continue working together with local governments out there, making sure we can share information so they have what they need to make good decisions, both water-wise and land use-wise across the landscape. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Vice Chair Smitherman, for introductions on the Water Resources Commission, and then we can go from there.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. We're going to do some quick introductions and a little bit more of introductions this time. Everyone go ahead and give your name, the region that you represent, the time that you've been on the commission, and what your day job is. Okay, so I'll start out. My name is Julie Smitherman. I represent the Southwest region. I've been on the commission for 5 years now, and I work for a municipality down in Southern Oregon, Medford Water, and I'm the Water Resources Customer Service and Billing Manager. Pass it on to, I'll go to my right. Woody, you can go ahead first. We'll do Oregon Water Resources Commission first, and then we'll go to LCDC.
My name is Woody Wolf. My name is Woody Wolf. I'm the East Region Commissioner. I came on the board just shortly after Julie, so I believe I'm a 4-year member on the commission, and I am an agricultural producer for my day job. Primarily alfalfa and Timothy hay exports.
Okay, and I'll move back here to
Joe.
okay. Joe, would you like to introduce yourself, your region, the time on the commission, and what your current role is outside the commission? Red is on.
Morning, Joe Mall from West Central. Outside the commission, I head up the McKenzie River Trust, the land trust in Eugene, Oregon.
Thank you. Okay, Jan?
Hi, I'm Jan Newman. I've been on the commission about 1.5 years, I guess, and my day job is being retired, but I used to teach water law at Lewis and Clark Law School and practice water law in a private firm in Portland for a while. Thank you.
I'll pause for a second.
I'm Jan Lee. I'm from the Northwest region with the Water Resources Commission. I've been on the commission 4 years now. And
that's about it. Okay, thank you, Jan. That makes up the Water Resources Commission. So I will pass this on to our chair.
So hello, my name is Anya Lehalova, and I am the chair of the Land Conservation and Development Commission. I represent the Portland region. I've been on the commission 8 years and 1 month. I check that. And for my day job, I'm a real estate developer in Portland. I'm going to pass it on to the vice chair.
Good morning, everyone. I am Alan Lazo. I was appointed from the Portland Metropolitan Region. I've been on the commission for 4 years, and I'm currently retired, but I was most recently the executive director at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, a statewide civil rights organization fighting against housing discrimination.
I'll pass it on to the right.
My name is Leanne Thompson. I'm a Clatsop County Commissioner in my day job. I'm in year 12 of 12. I was a Clatsop County Planning Commissioner before that. So I am devoted to Clatsop County, but I'm the Coastal Commissioner on LCDC. I came on in October of 24. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Boyer and I represent the Northern Willamette Valley. I've been on the commission for 4 years and my day job is I'm an organic farmer.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stuart Warren. I represent the Southern Willamette Valley. This is my 6th year on the commission, and I am an urban planner with the city of Eugene.
And I'd like to go to online. So Commissioner Porter. And we're saying name, region, how long you've been on the commission, and your day job.
Thank you. My name is Ellen Porter, and I represent Southern Oregon. That includes Douglas, Josephine, and Jackson counties. I'm also a city councilor for the city of Roseburg, and I've been on the commission now for about 2 years. And for my day job, I do environmental consulting.
Commissioner Bennett.
Good morning from the 18 counties of Eastern Oregon. I represent everything east of the Cascades. I am a retired Baker County Commissioner, and my day job still is a farmer and rancher, and we have in Baker and Malheur counties. I've been on the commission about 1.5 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's exciting to be here with all of you. Such a wealth of information and knowledge in this room, and excited to learn alongside of you today. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. Agenda item 2B, water and land use, state agency coordination. Thank you.
Very good. Are you ready? Thank you all. Well, good morning, Chair, Vice Chairs, Commissioners, colleagues. My name is Brenda Bateman, Department of Land Conservation and Development, Business Oregon. Previous to that, I spent 12 years here at Water Resources Department. I've been waiting my whole life for this joint meeting. I'm so excited. I can't even tell you. I'm up here at the table with some of my favorite colleagues, and this is good. This is a good day for me. So thank you for making all of this happen and for hosting this joint conversation. We very much appreciate finally getting land and water together in the same room. So we have a brief overview presentation this morning. We wanted to just provide you with some fundamentals so that we're all on the same page. And then we wanted to bring updates on 2 very exciting initiatives to all of you. One is the state agency coordination program agreements, and the other is the work plan development for the 2025 version of the integrated water resources strategy. So just briefly to get started, we wanted to orient everyone to an org chart and a program schematic here. course in Oregon law and was established there by the Oregon legislature in 1973 under Senate Bill 100 and some of its predecessors. It's a statewide program, and it's really quite unique in the United States. Instead of having the planning hosted and homed in local jurisdictions, it actually has its home at the statewide level with a framework that encompasses all of the counties and cities in the state. This framework helps jurisdictions state and plan and talk about how they're going to develop, how they're going to use their land, and where they're going to place features on the landscape. The executive branch, and DLCD in particular, is named as the steward of this program, and we really do our work by connecting the dots, helping communities plan complete communities, and then we provide the rules, some dollars, and some technical assistance to our local partners who are actually the implementers of the program. They have responsibility at the local level for comprehensive planning, for zoning, for permitting, etc. I think we can move on. So you've probably heard that we have 19 statewide planning goals. We've categorized them here a little bit on the screen for you so you can see the themes that they follow. Some of those goals are procedural in nature and make sure that we involve our community voices as we do our planning. Some of those categories balance the conservation of our working for economic development, housing and jobs purposes. Communities have the responsibility to go about planning realm helps connect the dots not only among agency partners, but also providing the technical resources to help communities balance their goals and do their work. So we'll get a little bit further into the concept of comprehensive planning to hand off to Palmer Mason, who will introduce himself.
Thank you, Director Bateman, and good morning, Commissioners. My name is Palmer Mason. I'm the Interagency Coordinator at DLCD, and I'm honored to be here. So Director Bateman mentions that the local governments take the central role in implementing our state land use program. And where that really happens is through the local comprehensive plan. And so on this slide, what we're trying to show here is that you can think of a local comprehensive plan as really two things: a community vision. What is it that the community sees of itself in terms of citizen participation, housing, jobs, public facilities, transportation, natural resources? But it is also, and maybe more critically for this conversation, a local comprehensive plan is a legal foundation. It is the way in which the community, as Director Bateman indicated, through state oversight, sets out key policies and measures for managing growth. And then what we also have here on the slide is sort of what we could call the cycle of comprehensive planning. It starts with citizen participation, data collection, establishing local goals and policies that are consistent with the 19 statewide planning goals, and then preparation of the plan are submitted to DLCD with an opportunity for they to engage, have the plan, to get implemented, and the cycle begins again. So the point of this is that, again, it's a community vision, a legal foundation, but also it's a vision and a foundation that changes with time, with priorities and changing circumstances. And that is sort of the overview of the land use. And so we'll transition, and I might have to say that was probably the shortest overview of the land use ever. But we'll move on to the next item here, which is the state agency coordination programs, which is a key feature of the land use program, even though it doesn't maybe get talked about a lot. And so we want to take today to shed a little light on this program. So this is a technical difficulties. Is that better? All right. So state agency coordination programs, what they do is they serve a key purpose in that it ties state agency programs and actions to the locally driven state land use planning program. And let's maybe talk a little bit more about what that means. So one of the requirements for state agency coordination programs is to ensure that what state agencies are doing are comply with statewide planning goals and they're compatible with local comprehensive plans. And that really happens in sort of two key ways. Agencies need to identify the rules and programs affecting land use. That's the sort of the key term from our rules. And then state agencies adopt rules with procedures to ensure that compliance and compatibility. And then also there's a second key part of state coordination plans, and that is to ensure that there's coordination between the agencies, local governments, other state agencies. And that includes a technical assistance program for local governments. And a key point of that is including procedures that define how state agencies will be involved in local comprehensive planning. So the agencies are quote unquote at the table when local governments are developing the comprehensive plans and then when they amend them through amendments to those plans. So again, a little bit more here about roles for the different players in the state agency coordination program. State agencies, as we sort of talked about a moment ago, they develop these programs to meet the legal requirements and provide that coordination. They submit those to the director at DLCD, who then evaluates those programs based on statutes, rules, public comment, and then the implementing rules, the director is charged with providing a written report of findings and recommendations to the commission, so the Land Conservation and Development Commission, as to whether that plan can be certified. Does it meet the legal requirements of the rule and statute? And then the commission, LCDC, decides whether to actually certify that program, deny that certification, or postpone it for further action, giving, I guess, the opportunity for agencies to make amendments and changes before that program is actually certified. And now sort of stepping back and talking a little bit about sort of where we are today on our state coordination plans, a bit of background here. So as you might imagine, as the land use program was adopted in 1973, the initial programs, the state agency coordination programs, were certified in the 70s and the 80s as the land use program was sort of getting up to speed and being implemented. There was a period in the 90s where they were updated based on some rule changes from the department. But where that leaves us today is that most agencies are implementing programs that are at least 25 to 30 years old. And I probably don't need to tell you that a lot has happened in 25 to 30 years. I mean, we have new issues around climate change, issues around equity, housing production, of course, is an important topic these days in state government. So DLCD, starting last year, decided to embark on a pilot project to work with agencies to update the state agency coordination programs. And we have been engaging with several agencies, including Water Resources. Thank you very much for engaging with us on a pilot project. And we're looking for ways to streamline the process. So move these programs to be more updated and more sort of relevant with today's issues and conditions, but also in a process that happens more quickly. So we provided a template that allows the agencies to sort of more quickly look to streamline the process. We're also trying to provide regular support through technical assistance, office hours, getting questions from agencies and trying to go back and get answers. Because it's, again, based on the timeline, none of us have really thought about this much for a long time. And so there's been some loss of institutional knowledge, if we're being honest, and we're having to sort of relearn the process and work together on updating these agreements. And then, as I indicated in my opening remarks there, the goal is really to ensure these plans or programs rather continue to meet the legal requirements, but they're also addressing new issues like the type that you see here: climate change, housing production, water supply. And I think that concludes. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to put the final note on the process that we're currently undertaking today. This has certainly been a process that's been a long time in coming and something that I committed to working on when I took this position now 4 years ago, four springs ago. And so for this pilot, as we're figuring out what we need to do to modernize this program, there aren't too many folks around who remember how to update and how to work on these things. So we've actually brought in a team of interns. I don't know if they're on the line with us. I think some of them are watching this morning. I don't know if we've promoted them to the screen or not, but Elliot Eastman is a senior at Willamette University. He's been helping us for the past year, along with Stephen Yee, who's a master's student at PSU, Master's in Urban Planning, and Reed Johnson, who's also in PSU's Master of Urban Planning program. They may be on the line, or they may be in class, actually. Now that I think about it, some folks have class to go to. And there was a fourth intern as well, Silas Carr, who was part of the PSU program and graduated last year. I just wanted to say that working with these interns, and they're helping us sift through all of the language, the requirements to get templates up and running, to help answer questions, to host office hours, to get some sample paragraphs written for our agency partners. They've been fantastic to work with. They're so smart. They have so much energy, and I'm so optimistic about the future. Just working with these four has been fantastic. So I wanted to mention their names today and let you know we have some students helping us in the background.
Great. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Palmer. For the record, my name is Katie Ratcliffe. Good morning, Commissioners. Very, very excited for this meeting as well, so I'll echo that. I am the Water Rights Services Division Administrator for the Oregon Water Resources Department, and looking forward to talking with you about OWRD's SAC program along with my colleague, Alyssa Micken. Before we discuss WRD's SAC program, let's discuss why it matters that land use and water use decisions are coordinated. Issuing a water use authorization without ensuring land use compliance could lead to development of a land use that is not compliant with county or city land use requirements. This could cause conflicts with nearby land uses, put pressures on pending land use reviews, and create challenges for local officials. This shows the value that the SAC program provides in coordinating land use and water use decisions. WRD's SAC program consists of three interrelated elements. The first element is our Chapter 690 Division 5 rules pertaining to compliance with statewide planning goals, compatibility with comprehensive plans, and coordination on land use matters. The second element is associated with WRD's land use programs. While Division 5 identifies WRD's land use programs, the rules themselves contain the land use programs within the applicable divisions. The final element is WRD's Land Use Planning Procedures Guide. Along with Division 5 and the rules divisions for the land use programs, the guide provides strategies to fulfill WRD's goal compliance and comprehensive plan compatibility obligations. The guide is particularly helpful for any land use programs that do not yet have rules, because land use coordination procedures applying to these programs are found only in the guide. We can use new water right application reviews as an example of how the three elements of the SAC program are applied to ensure land use compatibility. The primary authority for compliance is in our Division 5 rules at Section 35, and these require that sufficient information to substantiate that the land use to be served by the proposed water use is compatible with the comprehensive plan. The land use program for new water right application reviews is found in our Division 310 rules, and these require that an application contain land use information outlined in Division 5, Section 35, and the guide. The guide notes that WRD relies on land use information supplied by applicants and confirmed by local planning officials. When an applicant supplies land use information to satisfy these compatibility strategies, WRD requires that this information be provided on our land use information form. When a local government completes WRD's land use information form, they provide information about if the land use, such as farming, to be served by the proposed water use, such as irrigation, is allowed outright or involves discretionary land use approvals. If the land use is allowed outright, which is typically the case for farming on exclusive farm use land, so many of the applications we received, this part of our review will move forward with a positive finding. If land use approval is required, the local government states the type of approval needed, cites the applicable part of the implementing ordinances, and then indicates if the land use approval has been obtained, has been denied, is being pursued, or is not being pursued by the applicant. If land use approval has been obtained, WRD typically has sufficient information to know that if we approve the water right transaction, we are approving an action that is allowed under the Acknowledged Comprehensive Plan. If the land use approval has been denied, WRD is likely to deny the requested water right transaction because the local government has presumably found that the land use to be served by the proposed water use is not compatible with the Acknowledged Comprehensive Plan. If land use approval is being pursued, WRD will typically require that the land use approval be obtained prior to approving a water right transaction. If land use approval is not being pursued, the land use information form will typically not contain sufficient information to show that the land use to be served by the proposed water use is compatible with the Acknowledged Comprehensive Plan. In accordance with the Water Resources Commission's previous interpretation of our Division 5 rules and as upheld by the by the Oregon Court of Appeals, WRD does not have a pathway for approving a water right permit application if an applicant has not begun the process for obtaining required discretionary land use approvals. The compatibility strategy for water right transfer applications is similar to what we just discussed for new water right applications. Other land use programs exist with different compatibility strategies. Turning it over to Alyssa.
Thanks, Katie. Good morning. For the record, my name is Alyssa Micken. I'm a senior water advisor with the Oregon Water Resources Department. I primarily focus on complex water resources in the Willamette River Basin. That's my focus basin, but every now and then I get to work on a statewide project. Updating our SAC is one in which I'll get to work on, and I'm just thrilled to be working on it. I remember early on working on the integrated water resources strategy and trying to come up with some recommended actions to connect land and water. We heard about these SAC agreements and I didn't know what they were. So it's really nice to be full circle now and to once again be partnering with DLCD in this project. As Katie noted, we have a number of land use programs. A few about the first. Is that me? Am I doing that? Okay. But we have several land use programs that have been identified in our coordination agreement. I think we have 16 altogether. They're wide ranging. So a lot of the work that we do, like Katie talked about, all of our transactional work, like water rights, we use the land use information form. But anytime we adopt or amend administrative rules that pertain to these particular programs, we also notify local governments and give them an opportunity to engage with us. On bigger statewide policy issues, like you see statewide policy formulation, we take it a step further. If the commission's adopting statewide policy, we'll take a look at whether or not that policy complies with the land use planning goals that Palmer showed earlier. I brought a prop with me because I wanted you to see just how extensive our SAC procedures guide is. I found this binder years ago in our department's office, and it was just like a treasure trove. So just our program is over 200 pages long. So those that came before us really did a thorough job of identifying the programs where that nexus exists, but also describing the programs that aren't a part of this. For instance, like some of our regulation or distribution activities, or even some of our studies that we do are not a land use program, for example. Next slide. So other key elements of the SAC, some of these will feel familiar as Palmer was describing what goes into a SAC. But we have an adopted policy in our administrative rules that recognize the connection between land use and water. We have procedures that talk about how will we ensure compliance with the goals and how will we ensure compatibility with local comprehensive plans. When land use and water are not in agreement, say on a statewide policy, we have a process in place for resolving those disputes in our guide and in our rules. Our SAC also recognizes the importance of working with other state and federal agencies on land and water management, including special districts. And maybe, I don't know if this one's my favorite, but I really much appreciate that the land use planning program and the legal requirements require state agencies to cooperate with and provide technical assistance to local governments. I think if you talk to our staff that work in the field or some of our scientists in our groundwater section or our hydrologists, we're often asked by local planning departments, can we have a conversation about groundwater in our area? Can you help us understand what the laws are and how it's regulated? So I think this is a really important component of the statewide planning program, and I hope in the future that we can build upon it. Next slide. Thank you. So as Palmer mentioned, our SAC agreement is also very old. We adopted it in 1990, and it has not been revised since. Our administrative rules that Katie talked about earlier, which are also part of our SAC agreement, they were adopted in 1990, and I think parts of them have been revised in 1996. But since then, our rules for land use compatibility have not been revised either. So there's probably ample opportunity to revise this document and bring it forward to 2026. Our agency, we've approved a bunch of new grant programs in the last 10, 12 years, feasibility studies. We've got new grants for water projects, repairing and replacing wells. We also have a new place-based water planning program where local communities initiate that type of integrated water resources planning. That's been around for about 10 years now. We have a new funding source to support that. And we've also been working on the state's integrated water resources strategy since 2009, which isn't, of course, reflected in our SAC agreement. And lastly, you'll hear a bit more about this last bullet, water management and conservation plans. We have that as part of agenda item 4D. But that planning program where cities plan for their long-term water needs using our department's process, that came around in 1994. So again, it follows the 1990 update. Next slide. Thank you, Katie. So moving forward, it's clearly there are going to be areas where we need to update outdated references. There's certainly going to be divisions of rules that have been repealed or renumbered. We can see that in our SAC already. Since 1990, we've modernized our water right and transfer process. We're going through another modernization right now, so we'll not want to take a look at that. As far as OWRD's update process, as Brenda noted, it's just been lovely to have the help of the interns. They're available every week. You can drop in at Wednesday at 10 a.m. to ask questions about how to tackle this or how to tackle that. We're not the only agency going through this process. We have partners at, I think, DSL, ODFW that are also interested in updating their SACs. So we'll have partners to work with and compare notes to. I also think that it's very likely we'll need to update our administrative rules along with the guide. However, we're going to break it up into two phases where we're going to tackle the guide first and then figure out from there what type of rule amendments are needed. Our agency has a long list of rulemaking needs, so we'll have to figure out how this one fits into that. Okay, at this point, our Integrated Water Resources Specialist, Crystal Grinnell, she's not able to join us today due to scheduling conflicts. So Ivan graciously volunteered to cover this next session of the agenda.
So you're stuck with the less knowledgeable one there. For the record, again, Ivan Gall, Director for the Water Resources Department. Alyssa just mentioned earlier that the existing state agency coordination plan didn't take into consideration the integrated water resources strategy. So I'm going to cover that briefly here for us and update us on the 25-27 work plan, which we've completed, and talk about the process for the 27-29 work plan, which is ongoing there. The IWRS continues to prepare Oregon to deal with our water challenges. As we see in our landscape today, the warming temperatures are shifting our snowpacks and precipitation timing across the state. That can have pretty significant impacts for water supplies, where for a long time we've become reliant upon snowpacks to supply stream flow and aquifer recharge in different parts of the state in different ways. The strategy brings together our natural resource agencies as well as economic development, conservation groups, health agencies, and our tribes as partners to work to address these challenges in a more coordinated fashion, where we're going to be seeking solutions for mitigation options out there and adaptation across the landscape. Our success with the strategy and dealing with the various actions in the strategy really depends on collaboration at all levels, where communities are going to be joining local governments, state governments, and federal agencies, as well as our tribes across the state to address these water challenges. These are the 14 state agencies that contribute to the IWRS work plan. So it's the natural resources cohort there, plus Business Oregon and the Oregon Health Authority. Subgroups of these are meeting periodically, and the goal there, of course, is to partner on different actions in the integrated water resources strategy. Next slide, please. We've done a fair amount of tribal engagement around the integrated water resources strategy. In October 2025, a letter was sent out to all tribes talking about the 25-27 work plan and then the upcoming plan for the 27-29 work plan there. We did get requests for consultation from a couple of tribes. So we met with the Burns Paiute tribe in November, and then the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians in just this month earlier. So we'll continue that work with our tribal partners there as we develop the 27-29 work plan. Next slide, please. So the IWRS work plan is split into a couple different parts. The first part focuses on agency priorities. And these state agency priorities were a new addition to the 2025 version of the Integrated Water Resources Strategy. Those priorities can be found in Appendix E as in Edward there, but that was work that was done by largely by a subset of the natural resource agencies at the request of Governor Kotek to really try and focus state resources on key issues where we can try and move that needle and make some measurable progress there. The second part is really the full integrated water resources strategy. That's made up of 4 large objectives, and then beneath those are 48 supporting actions, and those are all summarized and presented in Appendix D there for the IWRS. Next slide, please. So state agency coordination program updates are reflected in the 25-27 IWRS work plan. So that's something we'll be working on the rest of this biennium with DLCD. They support priority task P2.5. So that's found in part 1 of that work plan, the agency priorities. DLCD and OWRD are identified as working together to begin this pilot update of the state agency coordination agreement there. There's also mentioned here the economic opportunity analyses. Our agency hasn't participated in those in the past, but we're prepared to do so as requested. Next slide, please. So this gets a little bit at the timeline of some of the key dates for the work plan processes. Throughout this biennium, we'll be working with agencies and asking them for status updates on the work that they're doing that aligns with the IWRS and the 25-27 work plan. We anticipate developing a progress summary at the end of this calendar year to share with the legislature ahead of the upcoming legislative session in 2027 there. We'll follow up then with a more comprehensive progress report on the work that was done under the 25-27 work plan at the end of the biennium. Next slide, please. Kind of transitioning here to the development of the 27-29 work plan. This timeline is different than the timeline that we worked with on the 25-27. And the main goal here is to align the development of the 27-29 work plan ahead of the governor's recommended budget development there. So agencies, if we're going to be seeking either new resources to implement actions of the IWRS, or if we need legislative concept development to advance actions there, those have to be developed in the next few months to get those into agency request budgets or through approval of the governor's office there for legislative concepts. Well, in both, actually. So that 27-29 work plan, agency leadership have already started on that. We've met once in January and are continuing to have staff and leadership continue development of that work plan there. Next slide, please. Some of the early themes that are coming out of the development of the 27-29 work plan reveal the need to continue working on the priority tasks that are part of the 25-27 work plan. And that includes aligning state agency resources like data and then the multiple grant programs that various agencies have. Again, trying to combine resources to move the needle there. There's also an acknowledgement that work plan items need to be achievable without new budgetary resources. So I think as many of us have heard, state resources are not growing right now. So we're being asked to kind of live within our current means, and we'll need to focus our energies on what is it that we can get done with existing resources. Of course, that continues to change as new state revenue forecasts develop over time. The group also discussed a desire to show meaningful progress or results from our combined efforts, and we'll continue working to refine our approach to the 27-29 work plan in the upcoming months. Next slide, I think that's it. So that wraps up our first agency presentation. So we're all here available to take any questions or encourage discussion amongst yourselves.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Sorry,
Commissioner Thompson.
Commissioner Thompson has a question.
Thank you. Leanne Thompson, Coastal Commissioner. This is such a heartening and important presentation. I'm grateful to be here. We know that it matters, but now the way you're engaging with it under the leadership of the governor and all of you is extremely heartwarming. Okay, that's the smoothing and soothing. Now comes the as we look at these issues, I see three broad categories from my grassroots participation as a county commissioner and as a neighbor on the coast. I see issues of sources, I see issues of system infrastructure, and I see issues of local governance. So I think it's wonderful that at the state agency level, you are integrating and planning and being more efficient and effective. I think that's great. When I look at what can go wrong, because I think that's my job, to anticipate what could go wrong and help us work together to remedy whenever possible proactively, those issues of source, infrastructure, and governance are extremely important because there's such variation. And when I look at scope of authority of your department in particular, we have in terms of planning, I think a firmer grip on controls. I don't see water folks as having those kinds of levers to use. And my interest is in a system that lends itself to public accountability. For example, as a consumer in a local water district in an unincorporated area, if I have an issue with what my local water board is doing or not doing, I have two forms of recourse. One is the ballot box, the other is the courtroom. one is ineffective and the other is too expensive and time consuming to met. So is there a way to look at scope of authority? And I don't look for an instant answer to that. What I'm trying to do is to ask the question so that it can be added into the way you're doing your work, because I support your work and I want to see it be successful. But if you have an instant response, of course, I'm happy to hear it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Brenda Bateman again. I said I'll start with the response, and then the rest of the team can fix what I say. But I meant to mention early on when we were talking about the 19 land use goals that there's a little something in there for everybody, and I should have pulled out or highlighted a couple of the ones that particularly implicate water amongst the 19. So just briefly, Goal 5 is an important one for us that focuses on natural resources, including the protection of wetlands and groundwater resources. Goal 6 talks about air, land, and water quality. And then infrastructure specifically is called out in Goal 11 as part of our public facilities planning goal. And then, of course, there are the governance or the process types of goals found in Goal 1, which ensures community participation, public participation. And Goal 2 that lays out how local jurisdictions are supposed to go about doing their comprehensive planning. So there are some hooks in there that folks can certainly use and bring to part of the process if they don't feel like a local jurisdiction has leaned into one or more of these enough. They can get to those through these goals and through the processes that starting with the process that the local government puts together. Many times these conversations go through a planning commission, and then there are, of course, the city councils and the county commissions that take final action on any of these plans and their amendments. So I just wanted to lay out that there are pieces there that are specifically required that folks can use as leverage or reminders. These are things you need to be paying attention to. But for more detail, I'm happy to turn to the rest of the team.
Start. Okay, great. Thank you very much. For the record again, my name is Katie Ratcliffe, chairs, and then Commissioner Thompson. Thank you for the question. So an initial response, and then I think we'd like to spend more time thinking about what you've brought up. But we have multiple ways, of course, that land use and water use intersect. And one of the examples we walked through, the land use program that we chose to use as an example, is a water use authorization program. And so for that, while when we review a water use authorization, there is a pathway under our Division 5 rules to apply the statewide planning goals directly. That's a rare circumstance. And so what we rely heavily on is the information provided by the local planning officials on whether or not the land use to be served by the proposed water use is compatible with the acknowledged comprehensive plan. So in terms of what we're doing, we're relying heavily on the expertise of the local planning officials. And then when we issue a decision, what we do, there's a couple different pathways that can play out. If we go directly to a final order on a decision, folks can petition for judicial review, or they can request reconsideration. Sometimes they request reconsideration, and if they don't get a response that they believe to be satisfactory, then they decide whether or not they petition for judicial review, which would go to the circuit court. Many of our processes, though, offer interim steps. And so there may be an initial review where we explain our decision or the likely outcome of a decision, and then what we call a proposed final order, which is our recommended findings of fact and conclusions of law. And that includes our evaluation of whether or not it appears that the water use and land use decisions are consistent. If somebody takes issue with any of our findings, including that one, then they can protest our decision, and then there can be settlement discussions. Sometimes that results in us referring the case to the Office of Administrative Hearings for an administrative hearing process on those matters. Then, of course, we have rulemaking. And so, as Alyssa mentioned, when we amend an existing land use program. So if we change any of our rules for a land use program in a way that impacts land use, then we have notification procedures described in Division 5. So we notify DLCD, we notify local planning officials, and those anyone on a notification list who engages on land use matters. And then they have the opportunity to provide comments on that rulemaking. In terms of the SAC development, that's something I'd love to learn more about when we amend our guide, what that public process looks like. But as Alyssa mentioned, there's amending the guide, and then there's amending any of our land use program rules. And at that point, that would also engage folks in the way that we're required to via our rulemaking processes. Is there anything you want to do?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Newman?
I have one question or set of comments, I guess, that relates to Leon's comment, and then another one that's more kind of nitty gritty of how things work on individual applications. First of all, goals 5, 6, and 11 are the ones that Brenda identified that definitely overlap with water. And I'm wondering if there is a sort of a direction or packet of information that comes from DLCD to the local governments when they're doing a plan revision that says, here are the state databases that could be useful to you. You know, there's the water portal, which is still getting worked on, but ODFW has lots of information about species and habitat and so forth. Is there an effort to kind of push the available state data, which isn't perfect, to the local governments? And I realize that, you know, some city governments like Eugene or elsewhere might be very receptive to that sort of thing. And then there may be some county governments doing planning for unincorporated areas who may resist some of that information. But I'm just wondering if there's an effort to get that state data about this is where it relates to Leanne's comments too, about groundwater resources, about watershed, drinking water source areas that DEQ and OHA keep track of, all that information. Does that get to the local planners from the get-go, or do they have to be sort of motivated to go look for that sort of thing? And then I have a follow-up.
Commissioner Newman, thank you for that question. And Commissioner Thompson too. I had ideas for how to respond to that, but I wanted to make sure we got to other questions too. What comes to mind for me when I think about providing information and data to local governments for comprehensive planning or other types of planning is we've invested quite a bit of energy, time, and resources into helping assist local communities with developing their own integrated water resources plan, what we call place-based water planning for short. This has been around for about 10 years. It's something that we piloted in 2016 to start off with 4 different communities across the state. I work closely with the Mid-Coast, which was one of our pilot efforts. And it really is a space or a venue of where state agencies can come together and provide that critical data or information that's needed to make informed decisions about water and land use management. So we learned a lot through that process about how many of our databases aren't structured for collaborative water planning, but really how we want to move forward on that. So that's one place or venue where we can share information, especially if a local community, which it has to be locally initiated. It's not the state agency coming in there and leading the planning effort. We're really there to support the local community. If they're interested in taking on this type of planning, we're there at the table with them as a state agency partner, helping them understand the data, interpret the data, and make informed decisions. This lovely binder I've referenced earlier, if anyone still talks to Rebecca Geisen, she used to work for Portland Regional Water Providers Consortium. I just have to thank her because she has a ton of resources in here, including documentation from the 90s where our agency pulled together resources for local governments. You know, here's our water rights information system. Here's where you can go and find groundwater information. I would imagine that's something we should explore as part of this SAC update process. One other item. We've also been working in the Willamette Basin. We have a couple of members on our groundwater team who really want to do proactive outreach to local governments and talk about groundwater, what we know about the resource, how it's regulated, how it's not, and just provide a basic common understanding of aquifers in a given area. We've just started that effort. Washington County, we met with them last week or the week before, and we hope that other local governments are interested in having a conversation with our staff so we can present science and understanding. So I'll pause there because I know that's a long answer. Anyone else want to tackle this question?
I have a treatise to I have a few things to say. You've pushed my buttons, so here I go. Quick rabbit trail, and then I'll come back to actually answering the question. So I have an international relations, international policy background, and I've had folks from other countries say to me in the past or question, are you allowed to identify what's not working? Are you allowed to self-criticize? And the answer is yes. It's what makes us strong or stronger. One of the things that has driven me crazy since I started in this position is the fact that we allowed one of the strategic pillars of the land use program to, I think, fade in a way that we shouldn't have allowed. And that's the idea of periodic review. Not the idea of mandating it, but the piece that comes with it, which is the information and the data that local governments need to update on a regular basis with some frequency so that they know what the state of play is and they know they have the information they need to make decisions. And without that, I think we all, we could make better decisions based on more supported facts. There are a lot of data databases and data systems that we've allowed to wither as part of this process. And that's something that I'd really like to get back because I think we used to be better at providing information to our partners or pointing them to more centralized data. One of the things that we do now, which, has, not everyone's a fan, but it's something that we fund and we provide are the population estimates out of Portland State University. So that's a database that comes from the center. Everybody understands that methodology. Everybody uses that methodology, and they grab it, they take it, and they run with it from there. They don't have to produce it themselves. And it's databases like that that I think we should be doing more of to provide from, at the state level or from the center, and we distribute to folks for their use, and then they can take it from there. There are some things that we're talking about in recent months, doing a better job of providing that have to do with wetlands. Lots of times we allow our local partners to just figure it out themselves when there are methodologies, there's a proper science, and we could be helping with those types of pieces a bit more. And so that's something that's really important to me. And I just wanted to point out that our regional representatives and our field representatives at both agencies are very good at helping with this technical assistance and matching partners up with the most recent, the best available science and the resources that they need to do their work. And then just recently at Department of Land Conservation and Development, we've established a GIS program, GIS shop within our agency. We had folks that had those skills before, but we didn't really have them gathered into a team that can accept questions and field requests and help local partners with some of their GIS work. Because if you don't know where things are in the landscape, how can you possibly plan for them or plan around them? So that's something that we're very excited about developing more in the coming months and years.
I'll just make my last question really short and just for something to think about. On the ground, in representing people who are going through both land use processes and water application processes, there are two complete paths, and they're independent. And they intersect through your land use information form, but only by way of information. It's either we have an approved land use, and so you can give us our water right, or we're proceeding through the process, the different phases. But it makes it very easy for parties to play one side against the other and to say, these are all the reasons they're not going to get a water right, so you can't give them this land use approval because they're not going to have any water, or same thing in reverse. And I don't know how you solve that unless you have a single process, with sort of single information, common information going into both decisions. But I think it's a real rub in the system that people can take advantage of. And I will say even some of my own clients used to take advantage of it. So but I don't think it's a positive in the system. So it's just something to put on your list. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Newman. It looks like we have Commissioner Bennett online, has a question.
Thank you. I believe this is really a crucial discussion that we're having
It
today.
looks like you're still muted, Commissioner.
I unmuted it. Is it working?
Oh. Let's see,
Oh,
it looks like we're having a bit of technical difficulty. It sounds like you have something great to say.
And
Who knows?
Yeah, maybe writing.
We can hear him
get a different
online if
person
you can
from
hear
virtual
me.
to speak so we can test our audio.
Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can hear you, Ellen.
Yeah, I can hear you too.
Steve Shipsy.
Okay, Steve Shipsy, would you be able to speak so we can just test our communications?
Yes, I can hear both Commissioner Porter and Commissioner Bennett. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Hmm.
Can you tell us what Bennett's question is?
We have ESP, but it's not that good.
So he can't.
I'll
Let's see
just
what-
wait.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner Bennett, thank you.
Just a pause. First of all, I want to say I think this is really a critical discussion and appreciate those that put this together. I guess as a county commissioner, my concern, and actually in an Eastern Oregon media discussion yesterday, the two elements that I believe that we will be looking at in the next decade is energy, in other words, electricity, but also water, as some big needs. My concern is that when you lost funding to have monitor wells, that really that puts a lot of pressure on, or uncertainty on, the whole discussion, because thinking specifically in the Baker Valley, no one knows really how much water is there. No one knows which day that they'll turn on the taps or the irrigation pumps and it'll be dry. The crossroads of land use planning and water become really apparent, because as we've seen in areas, and Ivan can actually attest to this, is that people that had 75-foot wells in the residential aquifer are now boring down deeper and deeper. You can say it's because we've moved to different modes of irrigation, but all of that said, unless that your agency is adequately funded for place-based water and the integrated water resource strategy, then local government doesn't have the opportunity to get the information. And as Director Bateman just said, without periodic review, they're not looking at their comprehensive land use plans. So we have this really large disconnect of what's really happening in the world. And number one, your agency isn't adequately funded to really jump in there, but the counties and cities aren't adequately funded to update the plans if they do have the information. And so subsequently, more houses are built, a greater utilization of the limited resource, with no one really knowing what day that we're going to become Cow Valley or Harney County or Harney Basin. And I think that's really a concern. It's kind of frustrating in one sense too, but we could be on a train that's really headed to a very dark outcome. Anyway, it's probably a Director Bateman, Director Gall response, but thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett.
Commissioner Bennett, members of the commissions, it's good questions. Resource scarcity is something that the natural resource agencies, I think, have certainly dealt with my whole career here. What I can say is that there's been a recognition of the importance of water, and we have seen increased funding over the last 8 to 10 years in key areas like data collection, where we can expand observation well networks across the state. And we're in the middle of at the beginning stages of a large project to update our surface water availability system. So we are heading in the right direction, but the ups and downs of funding and resource allocation do make it more challenging there. We remain committed to gathering as much data and information as we can. Alyssa touched on the age of our databases. They make it challenging to access that information and analyze it in an efficient manner, and really challenging then to serve it up externally to folks who need those data to help make good decisions there. The integrated water resources strategy does have a lot of focus on continued and improved data collection. Those are specific actions kind of dropped in there throughout the document. So we recognize it to be a priority, and we'll do everything we can to continue to get those resources and provide the information and data out there as best we can. Director Bateman, anything on your end there?
Thank you, Director Gall. Looks like we've got another, I know your name, Commissioner Mall. Sorry.
Commissioner Mudd speaking. I think all the way back to Commissioner Thompson's initial comment and question about the levers that you perceive that OWRD has or doesn't have. I think that's a critical question. And I think one of the things we haven't yet addressed is the change in culture that has occurred within the last 8 to 10 years. I think all state agencies out of the land use planning system were given a number of levers. Culturally, we haven't used them very much, or when we have, we've been very selective, and it's become really layered on local planners, and then you get this morass of planning. That's the underlying thing that frustrates everybody about housing right now. And so you say, well, we got to get rid of that morass, and yet we forget some of the levers that we do have. And I think to Commissioner Newman's point as well, those parallel paths, that's the hair pull for us, because on the OWRD side, certainly what I've experienced, and I forgot in my introduction, I've been on the commission, I think 8 years now. By the time something rises to the commission level, there's so much momentum behind it from a land use decision standpoint that we're put in a very awkward position of telling an East Side mayor, hold on a second, are you telling us that the land use planning has to trump the use of water, and the governor's call for more housing means we sort of have to just sort of say yes? And I think culturally, OWRD has done that for quite a while, because there was a recognition that in the absence of good data, we're just going to assume it's okay and issue the rights. And very recently, the department said no. In the absence of good data, the default answer is going to be no in some of those cases. And that's a tremendous change in my mind. And it sort of begs a lot of questions then with the SACs. How can we really unwind some of these things, to Director Bateman's point, and go back and just really look at what has worked and what's not? And I don't know how many years it's been since people called for the big look, to really look at the whole system. But I do think that in those places, considering, and this is where I think the water bias shows and probably needs to be there, we're in such a different availability place. We're oversubscribed. There's less water available. It's declining climatically. So we need to be in a position to say no, which is a very hard thing to do, especially when local communities don't have the economic drivers to even to lift that stuff off the ground. So I'm about to roll off the commission, but that is something that I really hope that there's thought given to the fact what role commissions can play. And if they have to play the role of deciding something that has so much momentum to it by the time it rises to the commission, it makes for a really ineffective approach in my mind. There needs to be much more discretion and ability for staff working together across agencies on the ground to have some of those no, this won't work conversations way earlier. That's my request, the gift I would like to see Oregon get, because I think we really need it.
Thank you, Commissioner Mall. Commissioner Warren.
Thank you, chairs. And thank you, Commissioner Mall. I think that sets up my question perfectly. Here we are talking about levers, and I think Director Gall talked about one that at least it looks like both agencies are considering, which is the economic opportunities analysis. So if you could talk more about maybe what your vision is for integration of economic opportunity analysis and water availability, I'd sure like to hear what that is. And then also if you could touch on any consideration around additional approval criterion for economic opportunity analysis along with the water availability. I'd like to know that. Thanks.
For the record, Ivan Gall, Director for the Water Resources Department. I touched on nearly the sum total of my knowledge on economic opportunity analyses there. We are happy to participate in the community discussions and committee discussions around those to help integrate information about overallocated areas, water availability, and opportunities there. Commissioner Mall talked about our new approach to groundwater allocation. It is going to be more challenging to obtain new groundwater rights, particularly in areas where we don't have information. There are opportunities for folks to go in and gather data over a period of time to provide that information in support of new applications. But I think our days of continuing to allocate in areas with questionable resource availability are done. The flip of that, though, is that there are generally plenty of existing water rights in areas, and we're really going to be shifting more to utilizing our water right transfer authorities to move water from certain uses to new and different uses there. And that will sit well with some and it will not sit well with others. But that's going to be the reality, is that we'll be shifting resources around to meet new and growing demands out there. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer as staff. If you guys have any additional information, that'd be great.
So Commissioner Warren, great question. And I think Director Gall is really kind of hitting the central theme as we think about economic opportunity analysis. And that is, have we started to ask the right questions when those are being done with an eye towards a declining water resource because of the climatic changes and the need to think about how the water that we do have and the water we'll have in the future can be provided to support economic development. And I hope as a part of the integrated water resource strategy, there is a conversation, and I think again, Director Gall is kind of pointing in the direction of, can we bring what data we have into those local economic advisory committees that are working through the EOA process and start to ask those questions? And it's really not just a question, do we have water today, but do we have water tomorrow? And really thinking about doing that. And this is an opportunity to bring in a couple of themes that come out about, state agencies providing more data to local governments and stuff like that. So that's the opportunity. Our data isn't deep everywhere. We don't have all that data, but that's absolutely where we'll have to go with that. So.
Hi, chairs. For the record, again, Katie Ratcliffe, and I just wanted to thank Commissioners Newman and Mall and Warren for bringing up some really thought-provoking matters. I'll address briefly the criteria that we look at for two of our major transaction types. So for new water use authorizations, we do what we call colloquially the four-part test. And so that does not include specifically one for economic opportunity, but what it does include is a look at if the use is allowable under the basin plan, or that can even look at portions within a basin. And so as Alyssa alluded to, there's place-based planning conversations that would include a look at what the community values and overlay that with what water is available in an area. And then we look at, is water available? So I know that's been a large part of this conversation already. We look at if the proposed use would injure existing water rights, which is not allowable per the prior appropriation system. So a junior use cannot be issued that would authorize or that would injure a senior use. And then we also look at other rules of the commission, which could include things like well compliance construction standards, impacts to scenic waterways, and various other rules that the commission has. For transfer applications, so Director Gall mentioned that there's maybe less water available to issue new water use authorization. So there's an enhanced focus on the opportunities presented by transferring existing water rights to serve additional uses or new uses. And those criteria are currently pretty limited compared to the new water right application process. So they just look at injury, whether the new use or the transfer would injure an existing water right. And they also look at enlargement because the doctrine of prior appropriation establishes a priority date to give somebody a senior use. And then we can't authorize any change to a right that would enlarge the amount of water that the folks are able to use under that right. So that does, again, not take into account directly economic opportunity, but it is one of those pathways that someone can use to obtain water. And then I'll just mention that our colleague at WRD, Carrie Cope, is going to give a presentation in a bit here, and she'll talk about some of those opportunities that folks have beyond obtaining new water use authorizations.
Thank you. Commissioner Wolf? Oh, or Commissioner Lee, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I'm on the national board for the National Association of Conservation Districts. And our districts around the country are compiling policies in regard to data centers as to how they affect land development, how they affect water development. And I wondered if we are working on something at this point that could be shared with them as they try to come to some conclusions. Also, the National Water Resources Association is going down that same track right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Brenda Bateman, again here. Yes, and I've got a couple of bullet points in terms of all of the initiatives that are underway at the state level right now that feed into this very conversation. The Data Centers Advisory Council, do I have that name right? It has been recently formed by the governor in just the last several weeks to look at issues like this. And our staff, particularly our economic development specialist, Lee McIlvain, has been putting together resources for that council or that committee to consider so that they're aware of the types of plans that we know about at the local level to bring in data centers, and then some statistics about recent development that we've seen. It's of course blossoming throughout the state, and particularly on the east side. So we want to make sure that council has the latest data that we have, and they will continue to meet over the next several months or so. I think they're specifically looking at water, energy, and all the other factors that we need to be aware of in terms of the impact of data centers. When we were working as partners with Water Resources Department to put together the integrated water resources strategy, we did want to focus specifically on this idea of the economic opportunities analysis, which is a document and an analysis that local jurisdictions put together as they're looking to their economic and their jobs plan. And traditionally, that document, of course, has been rather quiet when it comes to talking about water availability data, and certainly quiet when it in terms of the plans that a local jurisdiction may have to stretch its water supplies. That it's pretty silent in that document. There's no discussion of water transfers, water sharing, water conservation, or any of those tools and techniques that are available. So I think one of the things that one of the exercises that would be really important would be to question some of the assumptions that we think we have about how much water is needed for certain industries or sectors, and maybe taking another look at that. I just wanted to note as well that the other strand or the other initiative that's taking place at the statewide level right now is the development of a statewide economic development strategy at Business Oregon. And so for the first time, there's a conversation at the state level about what kind of industry sectors fit in different parts of the state or the state overall, what would be a good fit here, and how can we breathe some life into that? How can we be specific about where we want those sectors to land, what we want them to look like, and how we're going to incentivize them? So I'm very interested in that conversation, of course, because that brings many of these pieces together. And this is the first time that I'm aware of that we've been asking those types of questions at the state level. I think it will implicate water very heavily.
It's been very upsetting this legislative session to see the city of Hillsborough attempt to take 1,700 acres out of Gulf 3 resources and set it aside for data centers and manufacturing. And I know you probably have heard a lot about that too. So that's another repercussion with the land issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Wolf?
Yes, I guess as I'm hearing people speak, I'm hearing most discussions focused on both departments and how they're handling things. And as I hear Director Gall suggest that there's probably not a lot of opportunity for new water right certificates. If I have my statistics correct, I believe about 85% of the state's water is allocated to agricultural use. And as an agricultural user, and somebody who has done water rights transfers and conserved water projects, I'm just wondering what the department is thinking. Those processes can be very arduous and very time consuming, and what the department is thinking in how you create the fluidity of water transfers, so to speak, pun intended, and how you move forward to manipulate that without creating economic downfalls in rural areas where the agriculture is so important, and still try to meet the water needs of the growing areas. And I do believe the statement exists that the water is generally there, but maybe not available for new certificates. So I was just wondering if you had a thought process on how to move forward in that arena.
Commissioner Wolf, members of the commission, very good question. I'll start by saying there's a cascade of work occurring that is focused on that as we speak. Last legislative session, a couple significant bills were passed to help streamline our contested case processes, our water right transactions, including water right transfers. And our team, of course, is going through the most significant rule update that our agency's ever undertaken. We'll have 13 rule divisions in front of the Water Resources Commission next month, and another 5 coming on the heels of that later this summer to address some of those statutory changes, and then a whole bunch of just internal streamlining, modernization, and housekeeping that needed to occur. We've also hired an outside contractor that's been working with our transfer team to look at process improvement and efficiencies. They've been meeting now since November and are continuing to work on that process. And that is really to focus a lot of efforts on the very detailed phases of reviewing a transaction, and what is it that we can do to eliminate steps that seem to be redundant or provide less value, and reorganize the process or bring technology to bear to streamline things. And we've actually got a meeting, I think, scheduled for next week to update legislators on that work that's going on there as well. So we recognize clearly the shift from a lot of allocation to a world of more transfers there, and we're doing everything we can to speed that up. I will also note that our transfer team has been focusing all the resources they can. We did repurpose 2 positions from our field services division. One of those is to help with transfers. One of them is to help with new applications coming in the door to speed up our processing and provide additional capacity. And that's starting to pay off. We've had a 21% reduction in our transfer application caseload from July of 24 through January of this year. So we're heading in the right direction. Our processing times will be improving. once we get through the backlog, people will be able to submit applications and get answers much more quickly. And so I remain hopeful that that's going to provide a lot of the flexibility that we need moving forward to get answers to folks as quickly as we can. So I'm see if anybody else has any, Katie, on that.
For the record, Katie Ratcliffe, thank you, Director Gall. That's a great summary. And I'll just say thank you very much to our Transfer and Conservation section who's been working very hard, and the commission who is reviewing, like Director Gall said, a very large proposed rules package. There's a lot there and a lot of work from a lot of really great minds. I'll also add that we have a new key performance measure or metric that the legislature established at the previous legislative session, and that is with regards to temporary transfers. So Commissioner Wolf, I understand that's just a subset, but those are expected to have a fast turnaround. And so to reflect that, the legislature established a metric that it shifted. It started off lower and then they ended up adjusting it higher by the end of that hearing. But we are to meet 120 days from application receipt to final order for the vast majority of temporary transfers. And the team has been working with our IT folks to have better tracking tools to enable us to coordinate across divisions, because of course the work that we do is not just the Water Rights Services Division. It includes information from technical services regarding water availability matters, and from Field Services Division, so we get the on-the-ground insights. And currently they're just knocking it out of the park. So we're hoping to see more improvements there as well.
Okay, and just to elaborate, possibly, is there anything in the works that, like, besides the existing split season lease that would allow one, the obligation of the department to determine whether water right is actually being completely used or partially paper, but more directly, anything that would allow partial certificate transfers. If an agricultural user is participating in conservation practices that actually conserve some of the water on the water right, and then without having to go through a conserved water allocation in its entirety, is there anything that would allow them to recoup some economic gain from that conservation in a fairly straightforward path, or is that down the road or not even really a functional possibility?
Yeah, Chairs, Commissioner Wolf, thank you for the question. That's something that I want to give you a precise answer. So we'll look into that and get you some good information. Yeah, thank you.
Any other commissioners? Any other comments? Commissioner Thompson, did you want to ask anything? You have some time.
Well, this is so rich, this discussion. I wonder about a place like Morrow County, where there are such extreme and pervasive issues. I mean, the Warm Springs Reservation is another issue, but that's a separate nation. Morrow County is part of Oregon. Do you have any role in the remediation of the conditions that are so difficult for the residents there due to the water pollution?
Commissioner Thompson, are you referring to the lower Umatilla Basin, the groundwater management area with the nitrate contamination? Yeah, I can take that one. Our agency does have a role in protecting water quality and groundwater quality. Our main focus is on proper well construction. So wells are constructed such that they don't commingle aquifers or allow for superficial contamination to migrate down to the water table system there. We also have authorities for what we call backflow prevention devices. So these are mechanical devices that are installed on largely irrigation systems when the landowner is intending to distribute fertilizer through the irrigation system there. And our staff just in 2025 launched a major work effort in Umatilla County and Morrow County in that lower Umatilla Basin area there to inspect, I believe it was over 700 irrigation wells to make sure that folks were in compliance. And we did a lot of community outreach and engagement, worked with equipment suppliers in the area there, so we better understood the technology and what was available, and continue to work towards getting compliance on those. A number of the folks had some methods of backflow prevention in place. Others didn't have anything. And so staff continued to work on that. But it was largely successful. They've gotten most of the people into compliance. And we're working towards expanding that outside the geographic area. Kim Fritz-Ogren's the division administrator for the Field Services Division. She'll join us for lunch, and she's got more detailed information if you'd like to pursue that. So
just a quick follow-up on that, Ivan. You mentioned that you're looking at expanding the requirements for backflow throughout maybe the rest of the state, or is that right now there's just requirements in that area of the state?
Vice Chair Smitherman, members of the commissions, yeah, for clarification, these are statewide rules, so they do apply across the state. Our main focus has been in the lower Umatilla Basin area there because of the significant amount of contamination and the number of impacted domestic wells and other wells there from the water quality perspective. We did get some recent statutory update, I believe it was last session, that expands that backflow prevention requirement from groundwater to surface water diversions as well. We haven't had an opportunity to really develop into that yet and create a program that will help us protect surface water quality as well.
Great, thank you. I know it's a requirement of OHA, Oregon Health Authority, especially as working for a municipality and a water utility. It is a requirement and is something that we have to enforce in our communities. And so thank you for explaining that as it relates to agriculture as well. All right, any more questions? This is, we could talk all day, I think. I'm going to call on Commissioner Boyer first.
Thank you, chairs. At the Soil and Water Conservation Commission level, we are going to be reviewing the Oregon plan as it pertains to ag water quality, or actually just water quality. And I'm curious because soil and water conservation districts are specifically called out in that plan for water quality work. I'm curious if either of you guys, as you're reviewing the SAC, are you looking at that document at all?
Commissioner Boyer, thanks for the question. So you're asking if we're reviewing the ag water quality management plans as part of the SAC?
No, just the Oregon plan in general.
Oh, the Oregon plan for salmon and watersheds.
Yes.
Well, I will admit we are at the very initial phases of updating the SAC and trying to figure out what's in it and what needs to be updated. You know, I mentioned earlier that part of our SAC agreement in our rules specifically call out coordination with other state agencies and federal agencies. So we've worked for a long time with local partners, OWEB, state agencies too, to implement the integrated water resources strategy and other efforts. Because our SAC was created in 1990, it doesn't mention the Oregon plan for salmon and watersheds. So I think that is something we'll need to explore of what's the nexus there. Especially for our agency and how it would fit into our overall SAC agreement. It should be on the radar for sure.
Commissioner Mall?
Yeah, this really isn't something that needs an answer. Maybe it's the coffee break puzzle or whatever, but I want to thank Brenda and Alyssa for both being strong contributors to gathering we did in the Willamette Basin in December, I guess, that's following 15 years of trying to integrate efforts across districts, watershed councils, land trusts, agencies, et cetera. And when there was a shift in some funding and other things, which was kind of midway in 2014, we had a straw man sort of exercise. And it was, what if we all merged? What if all of these different small groups just merged into some one big Willamette Basin? And so my request is, I think it's worth considering. I know it won't happen, but if if we had a Department of Land Land and Water Conservation and Development, what would it look like? And you know, what would it look like if the two agencies merged? Where would we have efficiencies? What problems would it have? And it's not going to happen. Nobody's going to push that. But I do think it helps us get into that space of outside of trying to have plans that integrate and things, but where are the places and the people and the behaviors and things? So I think it's a really good exercise if you could just try to imagine that, as scary as it might sound. What if we had just one Department of Land and Water Conservation and Development?
We can look back at this was the beginning of that conversation. Thank you, Commissioner Mall. Gives us a lot to think about. This is obviously, these issues are very complex. They've been complex for a long time. But the concern in water availability has created even more challenges. And so this is very important that we're here discussing this, asking good questions. I think this is a great discussion today. And let's keep the momentum going. Let's not just talk about it. Let's try to change things. So thank you. Thank you, commissioners. I think it is 10 o'clock. We're going to take a quick break. If everyone can be back in their seats by 10:15, that would be great. Thank you. All right, looks like we are ready to go. Thank you, everyone. We are now on item 3C. And we're going to hear from the governor's natural resources team. They're going to give us an update today on some executive orders from the governor.
I was going to introduce this item.
You are? Yeah. Oh, okay. Actually, I'm going to pass this over to, sorry, what's her last name? Chair Halava to go ahead and introduce more.
Yay, thank you, Vice Chair Smitherman. So the next item on our agenda is item 3C, an update from the Governor's Natural Resource Team. In fall of 2025, Governor Tina Kotek released 3 executive orders focused on climate resilience and clean energy. And her natural resource advisors will present these executive orders and engage in a conversation with both commissions. Welcome all. And we'll have Jeff Huntington, Senior Natural Resource Advisor in the Governor's Office. Please introduce your team.
Everybody hear me? Got it. How's that? Okay. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate being here today. For the record, Jeff Huntington, Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Kotek on natural resource issues. I've got Chandra Ferrari here that handles most of the natural resource team intersection with our agencies, and Amy Schlusser, who is our climate and energy advisor and really is our go-to person for issues that intersect the portfolio of all of our agencies that are touching on energy and climate policy. So we appreciate the time to be here today. Chandra and Amy are going to do most of the talking, but I want to kick it off by telling you that, you know, what we have been working on for a couple of years that manifested into the 2 executive orders that you have in front of you is really a knitting together a more cohesive focus for our 14 natural resource agencies. If some of you have heard me speak before, I can't get in front of a mic without saying we have 14 natural resource agencies, 34 boards, and 2.8% of the budget of the state of Oregon general fund. So we are spread thin and we have a big portfolio of agency work. And I think all of you are seeing that firsthand with 2 of our favorite agencies that are involved and engaged in so many different ways. And I want to thank Brenda and Ivan for the constant work that they have to keep track of and keep moving forward. So really a pleasure to be here today. You know, resiliency is the cornerstone of these executive orders, and building more resiliency in the face of climate change and the growing pace and scale of what we're experiencing in our natural resource base in Oregon, both on working lands, our waters, and natural ecosystems. So we really began conversations with our directors cabinet that meets twice a month, once in person and once online, all the directors talking about how we could be creating more of a focus for how our natural resource cabinet could relate to this administration and how we could prepare Oregon's working in natural landscapes to be more resilient in the face of what's coming and what we're already experiencing. And in many ways, water is the poster child for some of the most extreme examples we have right now of the changing impacts of climate on both of our working and natural landscapes. On the energy front, really the cornerstone of that executive order is affordable, reliable, and clean energy, and how we transition and how we manage that in the context of all of the different pressures that are on our energy infrastructure in Oregon. So Amy will spend a few minutes, even though that's a little off of your topic line, but she's going to spend a few minutes talking about that executive order, and then Chandra will talk about the other one. The executive orders really represent a North Star for the Natural Resource Agency work. And if you have had a moment to look at these executive orders, you'll see a lot of it is really around creating focal points to organize agency work and to have cross-jurisdictional kind of approaches to what needs to be done. It's much more in that vein than the governor saying, I want you to go out and do this, I want you to go out and do that. It really is, here's a North Star for you. We want to see how your agency will intersect that North Star, and then how you'll go about implementing with work plans to be held accountable for that. And I guess I'll leave you with one thought before I turn it over the mic, but when we're here talking about implementation today and what the cornerstones of these executive orders are, there's a role for boards and commissions in that. And we really are looking at work plans for our agencies on how they're going to intersect with the outcomes that the governor has put forward in the executive orders. And we want them talking to you about how they're intersecting. When you have agenda items, I think it's a legitimate thing for all of you to look at one of the directors and say, so how does this particular agenda item integrate into your work plan for the governor's order on resiliency or energy and climate? And I think that we will talk a little bit more with your questions, I'm sure, but there is an expectation in the organizational structure of the Natural Resource Cabinet for an implementation team, a leadership team, and involvement of individual board members in the ongoing implementation of the executive order over time. So I'll stop there and looking forward to your questions and turn it over to Amy Schleusser to talk about the Energy and Climate Executive Order.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here today, everybody. I'm Amy Schleusser, the Governor's Climate and Energy Policy Advisor. And I'm gonna start by talking about Executive Order 2529, which sets the governor's priorities and direction for natural resource agencies to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help the state transition to a clean energy future that is affordable, reliable, and resilient. The executive order aims to achieve these objectives in 3 ways. First, it directs natural resource agencies to advance implementation of the Oregon Energy Strategy's least cost pathways. These are 5 pathways identified through extensive modeling and analysis by the Oregon Department of Energy that would enable the state to achieve its climate and energy policy objectives at the lowest cost to consumers. These 5 pathways, very briefly, are to increase energy efficiency to reduce the amount of energy used overall, deploy clean energy resources that benefit Oregon ratepayers, strategically electrify building and transportation technologies, increase the supply and use of low carbon fuels, particularly in the sectors that are hardest to electrify, and increase resiliency across all levels of the energy system. So that's sort of the first bucket of actions are all designed to help advance implementation of those pathways using existing agency resources and funding. The second category of actions in the EO are focused around getting clean energy projects built. And the EO aims to do this by directing specific natural resource agencies to develop a proactive and coordinated approach to reduce barriers to clean energy deployment and help streamline and accelerate siting and permitting approvals and decision-making within the executive branch. And then finally, the executive order aims to help the state advance a transition to a clean energy economy through the development of public-private partnerships and by evaluating emerging clean energy technologies and their opportunities for deployment in the state. So there is one provision in the EO that I think is probably most relevant to your commissions, and that is a directive. It specifically applies to DLCD, and it directs DLCD to identify opportunities to accelerate clean energy deployment under Oregon's land use planning framework. And what this means is that the executive order is really directing the agency to review existing rules and practices, including best practices from other jurisdictions, to determine if our existing processes create unnecessary barriers to renewable energy deployment, and identify opportunities to overcome these barriers and accelerate development. We recognize that Oregon's land use planning framework is designed to protect things that Oregonians care about, and we're not asking the agency or the commission to ignore those things or to prioritize certain objectives over others. What we're really aiming to do is asking you to take a hard look at how you're doing things now and determine if there are ways to do things differently so that we can help deploy renewable energy and associated infrastructure in Oregon that benefits Oregonians and helps us transition to a clean energy economy that's affordable, reliable, and resilient. So the executive order directs the agents or the department to come up with recommendations for actions that and bring those to the commission for review and direction. Once the commission is able to provide that direction and the department has a chance to respond, it is directed to submit a report to the governor's office by July 1st of this year with those final recommendations. Happy to answer any questions either now or at the end of the presentation, but I
was thinking now might be good. Commissioners? Commissioner Warren?
Chair, thanks for the presentation. I'm really interested in the difference between Governor Brown's executive order between that board and Governor Protest. You just give me like 4 bullet points.
I will do my best. So EO 2004 was very policy specific. It set specific targets, specific goals, and aimed to create like policy frameworks. We're still implementing those policy frameworks now. And so Executive Order 2529 is really intended to complement the Executive Order 2004 and to provide direction for how agencies can continue to advance the directives from from Governor Brown's executive order, but in a way that applies Governor Kotek's priorities. So I would say they're complementary to one another. Executive Order 2529 doesn't remove or really change any of the requirements and directives from EO 2004. But what it does is it goes a step further and really asks agencies to review existing processes, see how we can do things differently, and see how we can maybe shift how we're using existing resources in a way to help advance Governor Kotek's priorities.
Commissioner Porter, it's online.
Thank you so much, Chair. And just a quick note, I don't know if Commissioner Bennett is having a similar issue, but it's kind of hard to hear the questions coming from people in person on the panel, or I mean in person on the commission row. But my question is, with Governor Kotek's statements recently on prioritizing economic development, and this is kind of a technical question, Amy, so I'm going to apologize here, but have we made any progress on kind of emphasizing the intensity-based targets for the CP, the Climate Protection Plan?
Let me, just for clarity, so when you say intensity-based targets, are you referring to the emissions reduction requirements under the Climate Protection Program?
Yeah, there's 2 approaches. There's the one where the one that was written into rule, and then there was another approach that DEQ said that they were going to try to flesh out that would be it wouldn't feel nearly as fatal to manufacturing facilities as the approach that was written into rule. And so when I say the target-based goal, yes, that would be, an amount of emissions based on per unit produced, as opposed to just continuing to ratchet down on what their baseline year was set at.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that clarification. So the Department of Environmental Quality is in the process of I don't believe I will have to get back to you on whether or not the rulemaking has officially commenced, but they are launching a rulemaking to develop intensity-based targets for energy-intensive trade-exposed industries, which are those large manufacturing facilities that require sort of a different approach, as you noted, for reducing emissions, because a mass-based approach, a mass-based reduction requirement, like a total emissions reduction requirement, may not make the most sense for all of those facilities that have just very specific processes and unique processes. So that process is underway. I will have to get back to you on whether or not the rulemaking has officially commenced, but the agency I know is doing a lot of work in that area right now and reviewing a lot of information and working with those industries to come up with those targets.
Okay, thank you. And if you know, I mean, if I can stress that I think most industries are going to fall under that, EITE that you mentioned, and that's not necessarily unique, but there is a strong undertone throughout the manufacturing sector right now that the rule as currently written feels very fatal to their businesses, and so that would be great to get an update on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks.
Vice Chair Lazo.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious about process a little bit. I think I think it's sort of hard to imagine that when we talk about the kinds of priorities that we're looking at here, I guess I'm curious about what's going to happen in process-wise. If let's say the department comes back with a report that says we don't think there are any barriers to citing clean energy or renewable energy facilities, but they're not happening. And so there are other factors that aren't in the department's control, right? We see that with lots of different areas, housing, different things. I'm curious about process and how you would proceed from there with regard to directing the department and the work that we might be doing within that area.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I really appreciate that question. You're completely correct. There are a variety of factors that influence the rate of energy development in the state, and we do not expect any one agency to solve all of these problems. We also recognize that many of these problems and barriers are outside of the state's control. So what the executive order is really trying to do is figure out what we can do, see what we can do with the tools that we have available and the resources that we have available, and try to remove the barriers that are within our control so that the projects that are trying to move forward are better able to address the other barriers that they encounter along the way.
Commissioner Boyer, and then Commissioner Mall, did you want to speak after? No? Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Wanted to do a time check on how much time we have with you today. What's our?
Oh, we have till 11:15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So when we have one more presentation.
Yes, and I think that'll generate a lot of questions as well.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Boyer.
Thank you. So would the goal of the renewable energy projects built is the goal to keep the energy in Oregon or export?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. The goal is to develop projects in Oregon that benefit Oregon ratepayers. And I know that may seem like I'm really parsing my language there, but the reality is that it's really the way that the electricity system works isn't confined to state borders. We have interstate transmission networks, and once you put electrons onto the grid, there really isn't any way to control where those electrons go. So the executive order isn't prescriptive in saying we're only going to use that power in Oregon, because ultimately it will be impossible to determine where the power gets consumed. But the executive order does aim to develop projects in Oregon that benefit Oregon ratepayers, which will help provide a boost to Oregon's economy through the development of the projects themselves, and then through the provision of affordable and reliable clean electricity.
Thank you. And for all the commissioners at the table, we have to turn these on, so we're not quite sure. Some of the people online can't hear, so make sure it's on red. And then our favorite, eat the mic, eat the mic. We will move on to the other item unless I see Vice Chair Smitherman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So you mentioned that there's a report due to the governor by July 1st from each of the departments, right?
That deadline specifically applies to DLCD.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for clarification. I know. Should you know about this? I am just curious. I know it maybe doesn't apply to us, but in those reports, is it written out on different projects that could be implemented using the current resources that are available, and then other projects that could be implemented, but additional resources and funding would be necessary to accomplish those projects?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair. The executive order doesn't really get into any details around the funding for specific renewable energy projects themselves. It's more focused around the resources that various agencies have to implement the directives. We are in other venues really trying to work with project developers and help resolve some of the financial challenges that different projects are encountering. And then prior to issuing Executive Order 2529, Governor Kotek issued Executive Order 2525, which is really centered around helping accelerate development of projects that need to meet very tight deadlines established by the federal government for qualification for federal tax credits, which represent anywhere from 30 to 50% of a project's costs. So we're really working to help projects take advantage of those federal tax credits in the near term. This executive order is more forward-looking and really focused on how the state can change its processes just to create a better runway for projects moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
I just had that, that realization where we have double the potential questions because of the commissioners. I want to make sure that the folks from Water Resources have a chance. So if there was one more, then we would move on to the next item. No. Okay, we'll move on. Maybe, there, Commissioner Porter, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't think it's a question that Amy can answer, but I want to throw it out there. Maybe it would be nice to hear back on this, if nothing else, sometime. But in light of the massive changes on climate rules at the federal level, and I think Oregon is scrambling to also compete for the data centers, which are massive energy users. I know we're under a tight timeline right now, but I would love to hear what some of the thoughts are surrounding that, because other states aren't going to be subject to a lot of these rules, and Oregon is still imposing their own. And so I just want to put that on the table, and Amy doesn't need to address it now, but I would really appreciate hearing what the current paradigm is associated with that sometime.
Yeah, we would be happy to come back at some future date and talk a lot about data centers and the context of land use planning and everything else that's happening. There's a lot of swirl right now. Yes.
Yeah, and I won't ask my question. I mean, you don't need to answer my question now, but I was also going to ask about the intersection between the offshore wind processes and how that does or doesn't play into the executive order. So I feel like those two topics touch national policy areas. And so, but also deal with reliable, available, or extra consumption, right? They're like the two sides of it when it comes to data centers, and then I would say offshore wind, what it can provide.
Absolutely, on both counts, and given the specific touch point of DLCD on this particular executive order this summer, we can maybe think about combining that conversation if you'd like.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, next part of your presentation.
Great, thanks. Chair Smitherman, Chair Halava, members of both commissions. For the record, again, my name is Chandra Ferrari. I'm a Natural Resources Policy Advisor with the Governor's Office. And I am very excited to be talking to you about Executive Order 2526 today. It's as I've been told, a relatively lengthy executive order, but in its simplest form, what this order is attempting to do is promote action that will build the resilience of our natural lands and waters, of our working lands and waters, and of our communities. As you read through it, you'll see the rationale for the executive order in the recitals. And in some, what those get at is acknowledging the vast importance of our natural and working lands and waters for so many things, for economic reasons, for cultural reasons, for fish and wildlife benefit, for recreation and so forth, and also acknowledging the potential to increase carbon sequestration as well on those areas. The recitals also recognize that Oregon is experiencing some significant change right now. And I know that a lot of these changes have been presented to you and reflected in a lot of actions that both of your commissions have taken. We're seeing changes to our hydrology, our water precipitation patterns. We're seeing a lot of changes to our snowpack, our air, our water temperatures, wildfire, how much wildfire we're getting, how severe it is, all of those things. And we know that those changes are impacting the health of our natural and working lands and waters. And by doing so, they impact the ability of those areas to provide these multiple benefits to Oregonians into the future. So the executive order really is about thinking about those values, wanting to retain those values into the future, and recognizing that we need to be thinking about that and taking action now. It's also acknowledging that we need to prioritize where that work happens to really wring the most resiliency benefit out of all of our actions moving forward, because as Jeff noted, we do have 2.8% of the budget. I'm really hoping that that changes in the future at some point. I think we all are, but acknowledging that that is where it is right now, we really need to make sure that every action that we take is as impactful as possible. And really, we do this, or we're best set up for this by acting in a coordinated strategic manner across our administration. And again, that can be somewhat challenging also with, as Jeff noted, 14 natural resource agencies, 30 plus boards and commissions. So that was really what you'll see kind of teed up in the recitals of this executive order. Next slide, please. So what you'll see on this slide is the main components of the executive order. And I'll touch on these pretty lightly, wanting to leave most of our time for conversation, which I'm excited to have with you all today. So first up, the executive order sets out a process where our agencies are defining what it means to have resilient lands and waters. What does that mean? What attributes or characteristics do you attach to resilient lands and waters? And why we started here is because we really want our agencies operating off the same page from the beginning. And we also want a way to be able to communicate to others outside the administration what we're aiming for at a broad level. So this is the first item that we have advanced under this executive order. And there are some active efforts by our agencies in a team that's led by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to structure a process to develop these attributes. And there are components of it that are going to involve external parties providing feedback to the state on considerations it should take into this process. And then we would imagine that once these attributes are in place, that they do serve as kind of, again, these broader benchmarks that the state is using to kind of filter the rest of its work under this executive order. So the next category is really about taking actions and identifying actions that will help the state really secure high resilient natural and working areas. And there's a few categories in there. And the first relates to working lands and waters. We want to keep working lands and waters working. And why is that? I think it's probably pretty obvious, but we know that these areas are actively managed and utilized for very important products that are consumed by Oregonians and elsewhere, whether they're forest products or agricultural products. But we also know that these areas can be stewarded in a manner that produce other benefits as well. And that can be providing wildlife habitat or sequestering carbon or improving water quality. The list goes on from there. So again, recognizing that this executive order really is directed at our state agencies and actions that they can take, we are asking our agencies to look at the programs, policies, practices that they have an influence on that connect to stewardship of lands and waters and identifying where we can improve those, right? What programs, tools are working, what are not working, what should we be scaling, what can we improve, what can we expand? So this is really a hard look at, again, where the state has an intersection into stewardship practices on lands and waters and looking at improving those. There's another section under this category that relates specifically to nearshore resiliency and looking at some of our businesses that rely on nearshore resources, as well as our ecological values that are attached to our nearshore environment. And there's some direct call outs to certain agencies to be collaborating in this space and identifying actions to build nearshore resiliency. And DLCD is among those agencies, in particular because of the Ocean Policy Advisory Committee that also is under that agency's umbrella. The next category of actions is around building the resiliency of our natural lands and waters. And what the EO directs our agencies to do is to identify and further actions that will improve resiliency of lands and waters, or 10% more lands and waters within 10 years. And what this is, again, a very broad category. It relates to actions that would be protect actions, that would connect, that would restore, that would conserve. And we've really asked our agencies to, again, prioritize these actions in a way that you are trying to derive multiple benefits from everything that you do, and that are really targeting high resiliency areas, right? So these are areas that we know are currently providing lots of benefit, and they're likely to even with climate change, or they're areas that we know with some focused attention, they could be high resiliency areas. So we're taking really a hard look at where to implement these sorts of actions. There's another category in here around mitigation solutions and bringing our agencies together to think about where we can be more innovative in that space, recognizing again that in some cases our mitigation frameworks across our agencies are not necessarily producing the benefits that we would hope for. There can be frustrating for folks that are seeking mitigation credits, and they can also be frustrating for the agencies that are looking to make sure that really important values are mitigated. So we are having a focused conversation on that topic as well. The next category is around the state agencies leading by example. And what this means is where we have state agencies that own or manage lands or waters for a particular purpose that they are, of course, going to continue managing for that purpose, but they are going to implement actions that also increase and improve climate resiliency as part of that too. And we're really excited to have our agencies together because we think there is a lot of information sharing and cross-learning that can happen because, of course, a lot of our agencies are doing some really exciting things in this space already. And then finally, we have a relatively large category around building community and wildfire resilience. And there's a number of things that fall within this, but really the two main actions that we're looking to advance include completion of a plan for a resilient Oregon. This is a plan that's being led by our resilience officer in the governor's office. And it's really looking at working from the ground up with community partners to identify strategies that will help communities adapt and thrive in the face of climate risk. So it's a much broader category than natural and working lands and waters, but of course, natural and working lands and waters are a component of that. And so this work is ongoing, and that plan is set to be completed, I believe it's later this year. The other thing that we're looking to advance under this category is accelerating the implementation of our 20-year stewardship strategy. And again, this is looking at how we can partner across land ownership types to increase pace and scale of restoration treatments, other actions that will help improve our resiliency to wildfire. So those are the main components of directive, or the main directives that you'll find in this executive order. But we've said equally important to what we've asked the agencies to do, it's how we're asking them to do this work. And Jeff and Amy both spoke to certain pieces of this already, but of course it's really important that we stay coordinated on implementation. So the governor's office, what's required in the executive order and what the governor's office has already implemented is establishing an interagency leadership team. So every agency that has a role to play under this executive order has a representative at the table to coordinate around implementation of the executive order. Part of what the charge of that group will be is coordinating around the development of biennial work plans. So every agency, again, that connects to this executive order will be identifying the actions that they're going to be taking to implement. And we'll be having conversations about that within the context of that team to make sure we're not missing any sort of connections and we're saying, again, well coordinated. Those plans, there's a requirement that those are shared with boards and commissions before they are adopted, and that there are opportunities for public comment as part of that as well, because again, we are hoping that what we are doing here is consistent with partner priorities, our tribal government's priorities, things like that. We also we have not done this yet, but it is required by the executive order, and it will be one of the next actions that we implement, is to convene a board, a team that is made up of board and commission members that can help advise on the implementation of the executive order. And again, this is for us to stay well coordinated on this work. And then we are also requiring that our agencies, together with our office, take a look at key performance measures that are currently part of, or that the agencies are reporting on, to make sure those are really reflective of the sorts of metrics that we think we'd like to track, consistent with the objectives of this executive order. So in sum, this is really about us being able to recognize that changes here, more changes coming. We've got some really valuable natural working lands and waters. We want to make sure that those values can persist into the future. And we know that we need to drive coordinated policy. We need to collectively prioritize where actions are going to make the most difference. And we need to make sure that we've got the right toolkit to respond to change into the future. And we want to do that in an area where we create space for innovation, partnership, and other solutions. And so that's really the driver behind this executive order. And I think with that, I will stop and happy to take questions.
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Thompson.
Well, thank you. This is so heartening to see this leadership and this focus on efficiency and effectiveness, because that's how I'm interpreting it. This is what we need to be doing. But speaking as a county commissioner in year 12 of 12 and a planning commissioner before that, I've looked at 15 years of increasingly divided public opinion. So the idea that we allow public input is good. And can you help us look to the resolution of not only conflicting values and conflicting points of view, but really very different realities on the parts of the populations that we're dealing with?
Commissioner Thompson, thank you for the question. I appreciate the perspective and do recognize that we do have some significant policy differences across the state. I think what we are intending to do with this executive order, and what I hope will help with that, is that we're taking a look at values across the board that I think every Oregonian could connect into, right? Like our lands and waters are important for a lot of reasons. And it may be that you connect more closely with the fact that that's fish habitat, or you connect because it's providing your community with water, or you connect because, you're producing your family's livelihood, with that parcel, whatever it is. And so acknowledging that all of those things are important values that need to persist into the future. And so what we really want to be able to do is to create a system where we're prioritizing where, like, if we have really special habitat, that a lot of values are going to go away if you take that, if we aren't taking protective action there, then we know where those are. And if we have really prime agricultural land and you don't want to see that, right, transition over into the future, where those areas are. And so that you can make really informed decisions going forward about multiple values. So it's not necessarily about elevating anything over another thing, but it is recognizing that trade-offs have to happen in conversations. And if we can be really informed about those things and identify why we're doing something in this space and why we're doing something else in this space, it makes sense to folks. Because I do think it starts from
being able to have some shared understanding and some shared values. And we're not going to solve with this executive order every policy difference. Those will persist, right? But even being able to make some headway there, and again, through finding where that larger umbrella exists to pull people together, I think that's one of the goals of the executive order.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that because I agree with everything Chandra just said. And the first bullet, that bucket around resiliency attributes, was really a topic of conversation for the directors to say, what we haven't done in the past is really take a look based on the science. What are some of those key indicators that if we focus on those, we have every right to expect that we'll have greater resiliency in the landscape or waters in the future, 10 years from now, than if we treat everything as equal. Long time ago, I was the director of OWEB, and we spent a lot of money getting rid of fish barriers, fish passage barriers. We never asked, and didn't need to in the 90s and early 2000s, what was the water temperature that we were allowing access to. Now we know cold water refugia is a key attribute of more resilient waters. So I think already OWEB has begun this transition of saying, well, should we be funding all fish passage barriers, or should we be funding those barriers that, getting rid of those barriers that provide access to the cold water refugia, so that we know the fish will be able to survive once they access that new stream reach. That's cold water refugia, wildlife corridors. There are a number of attributes that you could say, these are the things that, as a screen, when an agency is determining policies or budget priorities, maybe if we think more about these things, we might be more resilient 10 years from now than if we don't think about these things and we just continue to manage our resources the way we've been managing them for the last 2 decades. And that's not a values thing as much as a course screen that begins to create some points of focus. And if that is available to 14 agencies, they are obviously not going to intersect with those attributes equally. They will pick and choose which attributes are most relevant to their mission and their constituencies, and then begin to integrate that hopefully into a decision-making process. So that's one thing that we spend a lot of time talking about that's a little different, that kind of tries to get us past open a door to how we then engage in that values conversation with constituencies that see things with different light.
Commissioner Mall.
Once again, I find the question you started with just really intriguing and want to pile on to it. I get the sense that these executive orders are like two well-meaning friends who end up in a boxing ring and are just going to bludgeon each other, quite frankly, because of the inherent tensions between what we're doing. And I think back to, remember how excited we were about ethanol. Ethanol was going to save the day until we realized that, well, it's not nearly as energy efficient. And wow, we've really plowed up a lot of native prairie in the American Midwest. And I think that with the energy development, the Executive Order 2029, I don't know yet. I see you're doing an assessment of the impact of transmission corridors, but that is the conversation in the land conservation world around the country right now, because the implications of the transmission corridors and eminent domain through conserved areas, through tribal areas, especially Native nations, is big issue. And I hope we can get ahead of that from a planning standpoint, just as you're describing, Jeff. I do kind of wonder, though, Chandra, you mentioned trying to get multiple benefits from everything we do. And sometimes I feel like Oregon, we feel so compelled to triple bottom line everything that we miss really good opportunities. And we at Water Resources have talked about this for years, and that it's baked into how we assess grants and loans applications. They have to meet minimum scores on all 3. And sometimes you look at it and think, we should be supporting this county's or this city's attempt to get a water purification plant, but because it doesn't have a habitat component, it doesn't measure up. And so I don't know where it happens, but I certainly hope we have the opportunity to say, yeah, we are making a choice here, and it's not the best thing for the environment, but given the priority that we have for this community or something like that, in this case, it's going to be like a what do you call it, Woody, a sacrifice area where you take your cows down to one part of the creek to water them so that they don't go over the entire creek. And I don't know. Does any of that make sense? Is it the kind of thing you all thinking about? I'll finish with that. What can commissions do? By the time these things come up to the commission, it's pretty well baked. I'm just curious with these EOs, what you feel like the commissions can do to really help give the staff the flexibility and the authorities that they need to really act on this stuff.
Go ahead. I'll follow if I have some more.
Oh, okay. Chairman, that's, I completely understand what you're saying. And I think these are the defining issues of our time, right? It's the tension between multiple things that are valuable to Oregonians. And where do you choose what to do in certain circumstances? And where can you, for lack of a better word, have a sacrifice zone where you need them? And I think and this is partly my own personal philosophy, but I think you see some of it in the executive order, is that it's about priorities and it's about being really clear about the trade-offs. And I think we are trying to position our agencies and it's through the attributes process. And again, it's through the conversations to come on the 10 by 10. Where is it most important that we do X, Y, or Z? And yes, while you're thinking about that, bonus points for bringing as much other stuff along with you, but there's an acknowledgement that doesn't always happen. But you should be looking through that lens. Is there an opportunity for us to do something differently here and add some sequestration benefit and add a fish and wildlife corridor? I don't know. It doesn't always happen, right? And that's okay. But we should be in a position to know where those opportunities are and take them where they make sense. And so my hope for you all as commissioners is that the agencies, number one, will be bringing things to you and you have the opportunity to ask those questions. Have we thought of all the opportunities here? Have we thought of the multiple benefits? Have we prioritized things in a way that makes sense given our current realities, our current challenges, our current resources? And, I'm very pleased with the fact that the agencies, at least in water and DLCD is part of this as well, were able to think a little bit at a more prioritized level around the integrated water resources strategy, right? That's kind of another first step, is like out of all the menu of 100 things we can do right now as a state, what's going to make the most difference? Like, we should be clear about that. And it's going to be a hard conversation for some folks because some of the actions don't make that cut. And there's people behind every actions, right? It's not like they're all going to be valuable, but choices have to be made. And so you all are in a position to have to make those choices sometimes, right? But my hope for you and my hope for this executive order is it puts us in a position to make those in the most thoughtful, informed way going forward, and that you will have the benefit of knowing how it affects your sister agencies, your sister commissions as well, because there's efficiencies, values, conversations to be gained there too.
Yeah, I'm going to add a process piece on that because I think it's a great question, and we all in the natural resource field are used to feeling like we're in a bit of a ring in a boxing match, right? Trying not to hit each other accidentally while we're dancing around on a hard issue. I think Governor Kotek has said a number of times in my presence that the North Star for our agencies and for our boards and commissions really is to have a very open, very transparent process so everybody really understands the lead up to the decision that's pending. And then to understand the complexity of that decision and have a framework for how you're making the consideration that's in front of you, and then not being afraid to act. Because we all, I think, owe Oregonians a decision, even when it's a tough one, so that a process ends at some point and is not just an iterative, ongoing process that really never provides clarity of a point. And I'm a big believer personally in iterative decision making, so that we make a decision today, and if we have to adjust it, we go back and catch that 10% that wasn't right the next time around. But I think we really need, as boards and commissions, to recognize that these are some really hard decisions. And I know these two commissions have routinely had hard decisions pending and have worked through processes that were aimed at teeing those up for you. And sometimes we do a better job as agency staff than others. But I think by the questions you ask and by the framework we're trying to set here, it contextualizes what you have a right to expect out of your staff reports and your conversations with agency staff that really have the expertise to answer those questions. And then we want you to move forward and make the calls. And as long as you're comfortable that there's been a very transparent process and voices have been heard. And that's not an easy charge. And it's something that I think in our natural resource arena, we're getting more used to having to do, particularly with your commissions. And so I think this is just trying to add some context to that.
Commissioner Newman.
Yeah, and this is partly in response. Oh, sorry. Partly in response to Joe's question, and it maybe is a little bit of a ratchet to that question too, but as I was just sitting here thinking, okay, what can water resources do? And particularly what can the commission do? And it seems like, I mean, we have a bunch of things that we've already got partially developed in our integrated water resources strategy that I think are relevant. I mean, we want to get the in-stream right backlog taken care of, get in-stream rights established in streams. That's a resiliency piece. Maybe making some transfers to get them more senior priority dates is even more resiliency. Moving towards aquifer storage and recovery as opposed to above ground storage that is going to evaporate or be affected by temperature or wildfires. Encouraging municipalities, we have the water management and conservation plan requirement for many of them, not all of them, but it seems to me that those should include thinking about watershed source protection from a fire and climate perspective, and encouraging green infrastructure, having our grant applications, and this is where I can see Joe saying, "Oh my God, that's just another requirement." But having our grant applicants include a climate resiliency piece to their project, and sometimes it won't matter. I mean, sometimes we'll say, "Oh, yeah, you can't do it. We'll still let you fix this dam," or something like that. But and then groundwater studies, increasing our rate of groundwater studies and perhaps critical area designations where they're necessary. It seems like all those things are things that can flow at least directive-wise or request-wise from the commission. Even though we're still going to end up having to make individual decisions on hard resource questions. But it seemed, I mean, I've been having trouble until today thinking about exactly what our piece might be. And that's kind of what I've come up with just listening to you all. So
yeah, I think it's a really a great point. You all are volunteers, and my gosh, the amount of time you already spend being on a commission is astonishing to me, and the work that we ask you to do. But I do encourage you, in the context of the time you have to dedicate to serving on the board and the commission that you serve on, to not be passive and just accept what we're coming to you with from our agencies. That's important day-to-day work, and yet there's that really going to be a very rewarding piece of being on a commission, to have some planning with your director to say, okay, what is it that we should take on in the next year, in addition to what is that we have to take on, and really make a point of thinking thoughtfully as a commission about where you want to go. And it's not going to be too many things, right, Ivan and Brenda? You have plenty to do anyway, but this is partially about what should we be doing more of. And you will find that we'll be very supportive of the agencies if they have a work plan to say, we really need to ratchet back on some of what we've been doing to make time, because our commission wants to lead in this area in a way that's consistent with the executive order. And that's on the table for you in the context of the work that you've got to manage already.
Nice. I was going to say something. Let me go, Vice Chair Lazo.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the role of economics and economic opportunity as it relates to this. The executive order doesn't seem to mention that as an attribute or a value, but it's certainly something that we have to balance. And we see some of those examples before us in the legislature today. It's always something that we're trying to figure out how to balance. Is that part of this or not?
I think that's a base operating assumption in natural resource management, and your commission in particular deals with how we're seeking as an administration to increase housing production in the context of affordability and availability, and that directly intersects the LCDC mission and your work. So it's constantly a question of how we integrate our natural resource attributes and what we should be focusing on into the other larger playing field that is the state enterprise business. And the other piece of we laugh about the 2.8% is that I get and we all get from our office is, yeah, you guys in the natural resource arena are 2.8% of the budget, but you create about 75% of the noise some days. and that's just a fact. And to me, my response when people say that to me is, yeah, because the heart and soul of Oregon is our natural resource base, and people care about it. So.
Ooh, I was going to say 75% of the benefit is.
Out of that, that's a first.
I was waiting for 75% of the benefit is where I thought.
Well, some say 90, but I peel it back a little.
And that question made it good. Oh, there we go. Yeah, Commissioner Boyer.
Thank you. So your lead by example bullet triggered something in me. And you talked about how some state agencies own land. And I like to say soil and water conservation districts is Oregon's best kept secret. And conservation districts are starting to own a lot of land. Just as example, in Yamhill County, our district owns or manages 3,500 acres. So I just think that's not on everybody's radar. I know land trusts are, but conservation districts are really starting to step up and own and manage land. So just put that on your radar.
I appreciate that. I was actually on a call with the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts yesterday about connection points to the executive order. And I think there's some really exciting space there for some partnership. Yeah.
And my comments it worked really nicely with what the vice chair said, because I feel like when you have words like resilience and natural land in a title, it conjures up a certain thing, preservation and all these kind of things, not necessarily business and a prosperity plan. And so what I see when I see this is opportunity to grow businesses and innovation in Oregon, because not every state is doing this kind of climate-centered work. And I was a judge for a competition called MIT Solve, which was basically businesses coming in doing their pitches, and they have different areas. And the one I did was climate adaptation and low carbon housing challenge. And basically you got to see all these businesses with their latest technologies, a lot of them AI centric, data driven, that are essentially pitching and then getting funding from MIT and major companies to support their work. And I feel like in Oregon, we can be the source and the innovation for companies that start up that deal with either mass timber or whatever, is special to us, but specifically with climate. And this could be a real way to hook in the use of technology and AI. And so I feel like I never hear that intersection, but it's like, we're doing these awesome things to conserve land, and also brand new businesses can start in Oregon. Come to Oregon, start your business. We have the lands, we essentially can provide the lab to incubate these ideas. So I was sort of trying to go to the thoughts on economic development, how they can intersect.
Thank you for those comments, Chair. I really appreciate your perspective. Just to note that in Executive Order 2529, that is what one of the directives around evaluating emerging technologies really aims to capture. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head and identified opportunities to even expand that directive outside of the energy sphere. And I really appreciate that. And I think that is certainly a priority of Governor Kotek and our office.
That'd be great. Yeah, because I just feel like when there's conversations of climate, it's always like a negative in the sense of like, oh, we're preserving, we're maintaining, not we're accelerating, we're growing, right? And I see climate as a sector. Yeah.
Absolutely. And part of the prosperity initiative in the intersection is not just with energy, but is really around creating public-private partnerships to attract the industries in Oregon that will create economic growth, but around an economy that's going to be sustained over time. And, my favorite example, which I can't explain, but Amy can, Hot Rocks is a really super Hot Rocks, excuse me, is a really interesting, innovative energy technology. That's the kind of business that we're looking to bring in. There's a company up in Hermiston right now, 280 Earth, that is doing some amazing work on carbon sequestration coming from industrial sources. And we are really working hard across our office in the different policy advisor arenas to try and integrate the natural resource bent into the industry attraction to the state.
Awesome.
Well, and I just might mention too, it's worth a read about the Oregon or the Prosperity Council's charge, because I think another element that they reference is there is that businesses want to come here, employees want to come and live and work here because of the natural resources that we have, right, which are immeasurably valuable. And so I think that's just another piece that gets at people might want to come innovate here, and the innovation can be great, but they also want to live here and work here and send their kids to school here, and having, waters and landscapes that we have is a big attractant.
Commissioner Warren?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to bring this full circle back to housing.
Can you,
Am I not eating it enough?
Not eating enough.
I want to bring it back to full circle to housing. I think our department's always felt strongly that good housing policy is good climate policy. Can you talk about how both these executive orders play into Governor Kotek's housing goals, and what do you all see as at least DLCD's prerogative in promoting housing availability and choice as we make a more climate resilient future and talk about economic development through housing production?
Start.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. So we really see these executive orders as complementary to the governor's housing priorities. In the context of Executive Order 2529, it's really centered around making sure that housing is as efficient as possible, so we're not using more energy than we need to power the things that we are already using in our houses, to electrify the transportation system, electrify vehicles as much as possible. Strategic electrification is really focused around affordable electrification. So when we have opportunities to use electric technologies in buildings like heat pumps or EVs that reduce costs for consumers, we're really aiming to help advance the application of those technologies. And then to increase the availability of low carbon fuels for households that are unable to electrify, to make sure that we have affordable low carbon fuels that help all of our communities thrive by reducing air pollution and reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Commissioner Warren, for the question. As it relates to 2526, the biggest connection points I see are, as we're thinking about housing development, a lot of the intersections that you see with natural resources are around the inventory, the wetland requirements, right? What resources are on these sites? How valuable are they? How can we mitigate them if we impact them? And so what you'll see in this executive order is, as we've talked about, is from the beginning, is having an understanding of the resources and the value of those resources in any given area. But then also there's a very focused conversation that is required from this executive order around mitigation. And in particular, I expect a big piece of that to be around wetlands, right? Are we in a space where we've found that right balance of being able to facilitate housing development where it's really needed, but also really preserving our high value, high functioning wetlands in a way that really, really does preserve their values over time. And I think those are probably the strongest connection points.
Which is an amazing segue. I want to thank Jeff and Chandra and Amy for being with us from the governor's office and for having this lively discussion. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And so I said great transition because we're going to talk about housing next. Our final agenda item together today is 4D, housing goals and water availability. and led by DLCD's housing manager, water resources groundwater manager, and water management and conservation coordinator. This presentation will bring us up to date on recent groundbreaking policy changes at both departments. It promises to be a rich discussion. Yes, so we want to welcome Ethan, Justin, and Carrie. And this agenda item will go to 12 o'clock. And then for all the commissioners and other folks, we're going to retake the photo that we took. So meet outside in the same place.
The button when it's red. Great, thank you for this opportunity to brief you on housing and water availability. Before we get into this agenda item, we're going to do a quick round of introductions. My name is Alyssa Macon. I'm a senior water advisor with the Oregon Water Resources Department, and with me I have.
Good morning, chairs and commissioners. My name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I manage the housing division at the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
And good morning, I am Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section here at the Water Resources Department.
Morning, I'm Carrie Cope. I'm a water management and conservation analyst with the transfer and conservation section. Too many words this morning at Water Resources.
All right, Justin, could you do the next slide for me? Okay, so this morning, well, yes, we're still in morning, right? 11:30. Our goal really is to help stimulate conversation, and clearly you've had a wonderful discussion and conversation this morning, but really carrying on the conversation we had this morning about how can we integrate water information in land use planning, something that's recognized in the state's integrated water resources strategy. So what we want to talk to you today to help stimulate the conversation is the governor's goals for housing production, along with how we plan for that through the public facilities planning process. We also want to talk a bit about water availability. That's been a common theme this morning. Provide a refresher on groundwater in terms of the status of groundwater and recent rulemaking, but also surface water too, and how our surface water supplies are constrained in many parts of the state. Then we'll switch gears and talk a bit about municipal water supply planning. You might have heard earlier, I think someone mentioned water management and conservation plans. That's a program our agency oversees, and it really is beneficial for drinking water providers and cities to utilize that tool to plan for their long-term water needs. And then we'll close out with just the various really water supply options that are available out there today beyond, say, obtaining a new water right. So we talked a bit about transfers earlier this morning. We'll talk a bit about aquifer storage and recovery, water reuse, and water conservation, and other techniques that cities can use to help support housing growth and development. So I'm really just the intro as part of this process. My colleagues have a bunch of great information to share with you today, so I'm going to pass it along to them.
All right. Commissioners, just for the record, again, my name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I manage the housing division at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I'm going to go through a few slides here to speak to how the planning framework for housing in the state of Oregon has recently changed. For LCDC commissioners, this will be a refresher for conversations you've had over years. And for water resource commissioners, you might remember I was in front of you a few years ago talking about the start of this process. And so now it's very, very fitting to kind of come back and close the loop with you and just kind of tell you how it ended up and how it intersects with water availability, particularly on the point of public facilities planning and the obligations that cities will be having to connect housing growth and the need for planning for housing with public facilities, and particularly water in this case. So In terms of the framework for local governments planning for housing, one of the statewide planning goals is Goal 10 related to housing. And that asks local governments to plan for what's called needed housing. In the Goal 10 planning framework that has existed since the 1970s until just recently, that focus on what does a local government do to plan for needed housing really focused on whether or not they had a sufficient land supply, particularly land capacity of that land to meet their housing needs. And that was focused on projecting population growth and projecting past demographics and household sizes into the future. And there are some disadvantages of that approach that have contributed to today's existing housing shortage and crisis, particularly as it relates to that framework of projecting past trends into the future. And what that does is serve to perpetually underestimate housing need. And it reinforces those disparities and inequitable outcomes and underproduction and the impacts that that has on particular geographies and communities of the state. And so, in part, there's this disconnect between what cities are planning towards and the true need for housing. And obviously that has led to that kind of major underinvestment in housing production and meeting our community's housing needs when it connects to public facilities in particular. When we talk about land capacity, we're talking about numbers of acres. And only then, after we're having that conversation of land capacity, are local governments then considering how that land is served, and that happens under kind of that comprehensive planning element of a local government's work. But they were disconnected, and that caused all sorts of problems, as you might imagine, in a comprehensive planning environment that we have in the state of Oregon. So enter a kind of reimagining or modernization of this work that that focuses less on the projecting past development trends and population growth into the future, and thinking through a more true assessment of housing need, and then asking local governments to do the things within their control to meet those housing needs. And that includes the assessment of land capacity of OWRD is an important part of the land use framework, adaptability and dynamicism in the urban growth boundary framework. But there's many other things that local governments can do to meet their housing needs. They can invest in certain housing types. They can invest in infrastructure. They can invest in those. They can coordinate those public facilities plans. They can promote other types of housing. And collectively, those actions, land capacity, and things that are called housing production strategies, are intended to serve the role of local governments in that work is to kind of think through all of the tools at their disposal to meet housing needs. And one of the things that I want to kind of point out here is that the obligation for local governments to meet housing needs is of the city itself entirety, not just the planning departments within those cities. And that includes public works, that includes, maybe even the finance folks at the city as well. And so that obligation rests with the city at large, not just one department within the city. Under I realize I have an acronym here that I did not expand on, and I'm sure my deputy director is frowning back there, but the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is what ONA stands for. And this is the program that was passed in the 2023 legislative session that kind of set the agency and the commission on developing this program that you see in front of you. So how does this connect into public facilities and the provision of urban services? When local governments are assessing things like land capacity, they're assessing the capacity of what's known as buildable land. This is a long-term look at what could potentially be built or what lands are potentially available for urban development. This is a different assessment than what is ready to go to build any of the needs of a community, particularly housing, commercial, industrial, all of those things. And one of the, I think, core elements of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Program is a recognition of the difference between a long-term supply of housing, buildable land, and a short-term supply of development-ready, shovel-ready lands. And this program asked local governments to assess both of those elements. What land is ready to go and is development ready to meet our needs in the short term? And this is a new framework for local governments to consider their response to meeting their housing needs. And so here's a little bit of a definition of development-ready lands. There are 3 criteria that those lands meet: that they are annexed and zoned to allow housing, that they are readily served, they have services planned to be brought to those areas, and they're not encumbered by other land use entitlements or restrictions. And so collectively, you can kind of see this difference of development-ready lands and buildable lands. And those development-ready lands are really kind of intended to pop off of a map. If you're looking at the map of a city and you're saying, okay, we've got this number of acres that are kind of ready to go, and we've done all of the things we can do as a city to make those lands ready for development. And one of the key elements here, I mean, there are some levers that local governments can pull on making more land ready for development, one of those being annexation, and the other one being investing in capital improvements or reprioritizing those public facility planning activities around a more targeted need, particularly in the context of housing need. And I think these rules that the commission adopted are 7 or 8 weeks old at this point. So we don't have any official development ready lands inventory maps yet. But I think the promise of the development ready lands inventory is really that spotlight or the spotlight on reprioritization of those public facilities and public works planning exercises in the context of seeking to meet our states and our communities' housing needs. And so I really wanted to kind of highlight that, there are lots of things in the mix for planning for housing and weighing that balance between conservation and development that we do as an agency quite often. But the development ready lands inventory in particular focuses on let's make the most use of the lands that we have already identified for development. And so I think I'll pass this off with that framework for kind of the housing modernization over to Justin and others.
Okay. So my part of the presentation, and once again, I'm Justin Iverson for the record. I manage, again, the groundwater section at the Water Resources Department. I'm going to spend a few slides talking about the nexus between housing and water, given the context here. So Ethan just talked about development ready land, includes utilities, water being one of the utilities that we're going to focus on here today. So in Oregon, water is a public resource, and with some exceptions, you generally need a water right in order to use that resource. Existing cities and water providers, as Ethan said, they're planning ahead. They typically have a water rights portfolio, and I'm going to describe briefly kind of how the state's water has been developed and where we're at today in a water availability context. Before I go and jump into that, I want to kind of caveat that I'm not going to talk about two important things. Not going to talk about rural development today, which is typically gets their water from self-serve domestic wells that are exempt from the permitting process. So that kind of sits outside of what I'll be discussing. And also water service, water quality is a really important component of that. That's in the realm of Oregon Health Authority and DEQ, and I am not going to talk any more about that very important part of serving water to new housing developments. So, so with that, Oregon is a fire appropriation state. That's typically shorthanded as a first in time, first in right water rights system. So the state issues multiple water rights on any given water source. And in times of shortage, the most senior user or the first person to have obtained a water right has the right for their full demand to be met before the next most junior person has a right to start to fulfill their demand. So we have water rights going back to the 1800s or earlier. And in much of the state, this figure's showing kind of the extreme, the worst case scenario, but there's at least a stream in each of these basins to which the most junior water user that receives water in a typical year has a water right dated in the 1800s. So we've been water limited for quite some time, especially in the east and the southwest. In the wetter Willamette Valley and coast, that value falls in the mid 1900s. So that's still 70, 75 years ago in many cases. So surface water has been fully developed in much of the state. There are some areas where surface water is still available, but those are getting vanishingly small. So the way that we determine water availability is very basically we assess the natural stream flow that exists in a stream, and we basically do a water budget. So we subtract the water rights that have already been issued for that stream. We subtract out in-stream water rights that have been applied for fish and recreation. We subtract out storage rights for taking live flow into a storage situation for later use. And if there's anything left over, that's available for a new water right. So on the screen here, anything that's in this yellow shade, this is a picture of water availability in August. August is a high demand month, but also kind of at the end of our dry summer season. And anything in yellow there has no water, no surface water available for further appropriation. Some of the shades of purple there do have water availability for new surface water rights, but as you can see, that's a pretty small portion of the state. So as surface water was being developed over time and became more and more scarce, groundwater became a target for development, really starting after World War II, when well drilling and pump technology really allowed for more efficient development of groundwater. State passed its Groundwater Act in 1955. That was when what we would consider a modern groundwater right came into existence, and development since that time has been pretty significant. So these plots are density plots that shows the number of wells per square mile. So a purple dot is 16 or wells less per square mile. That's about a well per every 40 acres. And as you see, going into 2016, we've added more than 250,000 wells across the state, and the yellow dots kind of on a color scale, the warmer dots ending in yellow, that's more than 320 wells per square mile, or more than a well per acre. So it gets pretty dense in the development there. I use this plot to point out that development has not been evenly distributed around the state, nor is groundwater availability evenly spread across the state. So in areas where we've seen dense development and or limited supplies, the data from monitoring groundwater levels over time have started to show some concerns in various areas of the state. So in 2021, we took a good chunk of our available data, water level data, yield data, information on groundwater development within scenic waterway watersheds, and we put together this groundwater concerns map showing where we were seeing concerns with groundwater development over time. This stimulated a lot of discussion and ultimately culminated in our commission kind of catalyzing us toward modernizing our groundwater allocation rules. And that rulemaking finished up in late 2024.
So our current modernized groundwater allocation framework was refocused to ensure, again, as I think Commissioner Mall mentioned earlier, that we have information that says that water is, affirmatively available before we issue a new right. And that takes into account those various colors that I kind of glossed over on the concerns memo. But yield limited areas, that's taken into account in the new rules. Groundwater level trends must be reasonably stable before we issue a new groundwater right. And perhaps the most significant change is we redefined how we evaluate this term of art potential for substantial interference. So that's the way in which groundwater development can affect surface water. So the plot I've got up here is a plot of relatively new data from a work we're doing with the U.S. Geological Survey that evaluates the percent of total stream flow at a gauged watershed. So each of those dots is a stream gauge throughout the state, and an evaluation of that data to identify what percent of the annual flow is considered base flow. So base flow is sometimes called slow water. It's the water that's in the stream between storm events and the water that's in the stream at the, toward the end of our long dry summers. That is, in some cases, snowpack, but in many cases, that's groundwater discharge to streams, right? And anything that's in a green shade here is in the roughly, 50% of total stream flow category. Cooler colors are higher percentages, warmer or less, but we really wanted to recognize that groundwater is recharged from precipitation. It is a part of the hydrologic cycle. It is flowing someplace, and where it is flowing is typically to support stream flow. And as from a couple slides ago, that stream flow has been fully allocated for quite some time. So we really want to make sure that the groundwater rights we're issuing today with the most junior 2025 priority dates don't continue to nick away at water available or unavailable to folks even with early 1900s water rights. So essentially that has the result of bringing groundwater availability much in line with surface water availability. And again, from a slide ago or two, there's not a lot of surface water availability. So as municipalities, water districts look to support housing development, just adding new water rights to the system is less and less viable in most parts of the state. And luckily, there's many other ways to meet our water needs. And I'll pass it over to Carrie to talk about those.
Excellent. Okay. For the record, Carrie Cope, Water Management Conservation Analyst. I'm sorry, I've got sort of a low voice. Can you hear me now? Okay. Sorry about that. Commissioners, I'm going to talk to you about water management and conservation plans first. That just happens to be my program. So these are required of some municipalities and ag districts. They're a long-range plan for estimating future water needs. There's four main elements to a water management and conservation plan. The first is a snapshot of their current system. The second part is there's certain required conservation measures for efficient use of water. Division 86, OAR 69086 is the rule that oversees this program. The third part is a curtailment plan for water supply shortages, and probably the most important part of the entire plan, really. And the fourth element is a water forecast, and it has to be for a minimum of 20 years. So that's a look ahead to see if they have enough water to sustain their growth. They can do longer time periods, but 20 is the minimum. Next slide, please. There are approximately 3,500 water suppliers in Oregon, and this number includes tiny little small localized water systems such as HOAs, which are, well, everybody knows what an HOA is, right? Only approximately 200 of these suppliers have an approved water management and conservation plan. They are typically required due to three main reasons. The first is a water right permit extension of time. And what this is when someone applies for a water right, they're given a timeline by which they can develop that source. So that's, drill the well and utilize the rate at the full rate that they've requested. Typically, they're given between 5 and municipalities are given 20 years. If they don't fully develop the water right and they want to fully develop the water right, then they would want to get an extension of time. Quasi-municipal and municipal permits, when they apply for an extension of time and those are approved, there's an automatic requirement that within 3 years they need to submit a water management and conservation plan. The reason for this is that we want them to consider conservation as opposed to just diverting more water. The second reason is a new water right being issued. And for municipal and some quasi-municipal permits, again, we want them to consider conservation before they divert more water. And then the final reason is a previous final order approving a water management and conservation plan. Those are typically approved for 10 years, and the final order requires an update at the end of that time period. Next slide. This is a map showing approved water management and conservation plans by county. As you can kind of see, the majority of the approved plans are in areas of development and growth, like Deschutes County, Portland Metro, Salem area, and then along the coast. Next slide. Next, I want to talk about water supply options for economic growth. So water supply options, they can increase in expense and energy. You don't want to discount the fact that there is energy required for some of these. Desalination is actually the most expensive usually, and I'm not aware of anybody in Oregon actually doing this. I know Brookings did a report on it, and we're kind of looking at it, but I imagine it was cost prohibitive. Trucking in water, and that's literally what it sounds like. Water is trucked in, so very expensive. And I've seen where some smaller water systems have had to do this during droughts and mechanical failures, and it's cost them more than 3 months' budget just for a month's worth of water. Interties, I'll be explaining that later. Water reuse, water storage in this case, aquifer storage and recovery and aquifer recovery, watershed management, and then water conservation tends to be the most frugal. Next slide. One option for water suppliers is a water right transfer. And this is a legal way to make a change to an existing water right. Now, there are only certain things that can be changed. Point of diversion and appropriation. You can add an additional point of diversion or appropriation. So if you have a well that's not producing and you want to get your full rate on your certificate, you add another well through the transfer process. Place of use, and you can change the character of use. And this is fairly common in the Deschutes Basin. Some entities are changing an irrigation right to a municipal water right so that they can place it in stream for mitigation. And I'll explain that in the next slide. What can't be changed is the source, the annual rate and volume, the priority date. You can't increase the acreage, and you can't change the season of use. slide. So an example is the city of Bend. Most of their surface water rights are actually former irrigation rights that they transferred to municipal use through the transfer process, doing a character of use change. The water rights carry the same seasonal limitation and the annual volume limit that the original irrigation right had. So irrigation rights have an irrigation season on them. Typically, it's something like March to the end of October. It varies a little depending on what basin you're in, but for the most part. Doing this type of transfer, character of use change, in order to create mitigation for additional groundwater pumping is kind of unique to the Deschutes Basin. So, and they did this to allocate or mitigate for additional pumping so it doesn't affect in-stream and scenic waterway flows. Next is aquifer storage and recovery and aquifer recovery. Great example of this, city of Beaverton. They've been doing this a long time. During the winter and the spring, they inject their treated drinking water into an aquifer for use when demand is higher. In 2015, they actually recovered over 1,400 million gallons to meet customer needs. Drinking water from ASR wells actually represents 30% of their drinking water in the summer and 16% overall. Since 99, I believe they've recovered almost 4 billion gallons of water from their ASR wells. This is actually a map, thanks to Justin's group, of ASR and AR projects in Oregon. As you can see, again, they're kind of in areas of development, but also in areas where the basin can support this type of technology. Water reuse, this is a great example of the city of Cottage Grove. They were facing a compliance issue with a temperature limited stream, which happened to be the Coast Fork of the Willamette. The cost of the cooling tower for the effluent was over $1 million. And instead they got innovative and purchased Middlefield Golf Course, converted the irrigation supply to reclaimed water, and additional benefits included a 30% reduction in fertilizer use and expense. Eugene, this is a conservation program. This was actually in their water management and conservation plan. They upgraded their outdated mechanical meters with smart meters. A lot of cities are doing this, and they transmit data every 4 hours. Since implementation, over 18,000 notifications have been sent to their customers about continuous flow events, which can indicate a leak or somebody's left the garden hose on. And this has saved their customers over 170 million gallons of water. Interties, told you I'd get back to this. This is a connection between two different water systems. So City of Salem and Kaiser have an intertie they have utilized before, and I think they're going to be utilizing with the drawdown. So the city of Lafayette, and again, mentioned in the Water Management and Conservation Plan, they constructed an intertie with the city of McMinnville in 2018. The total cost was about $2.5 million. And they constructed 8,800 feet of water line to connect the two systems. And they currently supplement their current water by purchasing water from McMinnville wholesale at 720,000 gallons per day. Watershed management, source water protection. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the Bull Run watershed in Portland. That's a big one, and it's managed between Portland and the U.S. Forest Service to protect and safeguard the water quality for the city of Portland. Panther Creek in Curry County is another one. Following the 2017 Chetco Bar fire, partners got together and inventoried sediment risk and implemented in-stream and riparian restoration actions. I'm now going to turn this over to my colleague, Alyssa Mick, to finish it out.
Thanks, Gary. And looking at the time, I'll go quickly through this slide. We have 2 left for you. I just wanted to acknowledge that, all of the strategies that Carrie talked about are many, but there's several others too, including planning and integrated water resources planning. Oregon is a leader in that, but some of our other neighboring states also promote an integrated approach to water. California, Washington, for example, where you can really think about how do you manage a system using kind of a one water approach, where you're thinking about drinking water and wastewater or stormwater, or how can a community plan for both those in-stream and out-of-stream benefits? So this is much broader than drinking water and housing, but it's all very much interconnected. Other states like California have locally led groundwater sustainability planning as programs in place. You've heard mitigation a couple of times today. The governor's office talked about mitigation. This can be used, for example, in situations where maybe there's water, however, we've got stream temperature issues, or we've got water streams that are impaired and on the state water quality list, or perhaps we've got a stream where we've got sensitive, threatened, or endangered fish species. So if we're going to develop in those areas, are there mitigation pathways to still allow development? I think it's fairly complicated and challenging, but it is a potential pathway. Oregon, we're very excited. Even here in the Willamette River Basin, we're trying to take advantage of improved weather and forecasting and modeling. For instance, really understanding when these atmospheric rivers hit here in our basin, and can we capture that water in our existing reservoir system? So our agency is partnering with the Army Corps of Engineers to take a look at their 13 different reservoirs to see, when a big storm event comes in, and they operate those reservoirs primarily for flood risk management, instead of dropping back down and evacuating that water, can we hold on to some of that in order to maybe improve springtime reliability for future use in the summer months? So again, these are just other water supply approaches. It's not specific to housing or drinking water, but there's quite a toolbox available for Oregon to pursue as we're thinking about our longer term needs. And in closing, I just wanted to kind of circle back to where we were this morning when we were talking about our state agency coordination program and the connection between land and water, and leave you with our policy that was adopted in 1990 that recognizes that strong connection between the two. We talked a bit this morning about providing data to local governments so that they have the right inventories, so that they are just as much responsible as state agencies to protect important local water resources. Our policy recognizes the commission's role to protect the public interest in all waters, and also placing a high priority on complying with our statewide planning goals and achieving compatibility with local comprehensive plans. So I apologize we didn't leave you much time to ask questions or discussion, but we really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you. I was thinking about giving maybe 10 minutes for questions. Does that work for the lunch? Okay, commissioners? I guess I'd start off a question just out of curiosity, because we were talking about water rights, coming from the early 1900s, and I think about who has access to resources and who doesn't during that time period. And so I was curious how the water rights issue intersects with tribal nations.
Sure. Okay. Chair Halova, again, for the record, I'm Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section here. Pause and give Ivan a chance to jump in. All right. So there are several options for tribal water rights, and various tribes have taken various pathways, as I've seen. One of those is there are statutes that allow tribes to enter into water rights settlement agreements with the state, by which we basically develop some management regime where we understand where the tribe's responsibilities are and where the states are, and we implement that. So Warm Springs, Confederate Tribes of the Warm Springs is an example there. Other tribes have chosen to, thank you. Other tribes have chosen to assert their rights within the state water rights system. So Klamath tribes are an example of that, where they made a claim for pre-water code water rights with a priority date of time immemorial, and were still in that adjudication process that started in 1976, I believe.
Wow.
But we're at a stage whereby the claims have been recognized to the point where the department now manages water with the tribal rights in mind. So the tribes make calls within the state water rights system, and we act accordingly. So those are two ways.
Those are literally the two tribes we've talked to, it's Klamath tribes and Warm Springs. And so in our kind of government to government relations and consultation, we get to hear all sorts of things that maybe pertain to other departments. And those two in particular, I knew about in relation to water rights and historic ties and lack of ability of usage. And so, yeah, I was like, those are the two I was thinking of. That's good to know. I don't know. Okay. Commissioners? Commissioner Wall?
This is probably more a director's question. Ethan, you may want to respond to this too. I'm really interested on the revenue side of things. Jan, you mentioned the bill relative to Hillsborough's attempt to bring more agricultural land into commercial land development, et cetera. I hear very little discussion of, with this change that we've had after 50 plus years of the land use system that we have, of the wealth generation that has occurred in lands that immediately get changed with zoning regulations. Recognition of what we talked about earlier, that there's going to be some winners and losers in these sorts of things when it comes to values. But I've heard very little discussion about, okay, you give someone the ability now to sell their property for 10 to 20 times what it was worth prior to this change in law. But there's no provision then for the state, for our data management, for our programs, for any of this, to sort of help the provision of public benefit out of that by transferring some of that, dare I say it, taxing it, however you want to describe it. Is there discussion going on across the agencies with the revenue associated agencies, the economic development associated agencies, to sort of say, okay, we're going to have some of these changes, but we need to acknowledge the losses that are occurring to water and natural lands, and some of that wealth needs to move into these departments so we can get above 2.8% of the budget. Is there anything going on?
Thank you, Commissioner. Brenda Bateman at DLCD. Not really, no. I mean, we are part of a conversation amongst agencies that have, land use planners or some land use nexus. The Department of Revenue is one of them. And there's no strategic conversation like that taking place. And we talked a little bit earlier today about how we're just starting to dip our toe into the broader economic development strategy of the state generally with regard to what sectors we should be pursuing. How should we incentivize those? That's nascent. And I would say the deeper, even more thorny discussions like that, no, they're nowhere on the horizon. Thank you for noting it, and I will pass that along.
When you were saying and where that money would go, I was thinking about my previous question about tribal nations and what has been stolen from the native population. So that's where my mind went. But yeah, I think our department prior to not that long ago didn't really have those relationships set up, didn't respect those, government to government relations, and it's been a very important part of ours to understand the history, and then also how that relates to what we're doing in our, is our department creating perpetual harm by the policies that we create in relation to this? And those don't exist in isolation from fish and wildlife, from water, I would say, are the two areas that I could think of. I'm sure there's a lot of other ones. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that assumption is that with economic development and the growth, that the tax revenues that are generated by subsequent growth somehow come back. But But the reality is they don't. They're swept up into the immediate needs of those communities, providing the services of people living in those communities. And somehow we've got to crack this. I mean, we've got to find a way to better support the baseline work that we're doing and get ahead of this a little bit. And I just really wish we could do that.
Commissioner Newman?
Quick question. There's been a lot of writing about the windfalls and wipeouts. I mean, so, and I think some of the discussion has been about taking from the windfall folks and giving to the wipeout folks, as opposed to so if if you've been told under Measure 57 or whatever the original one was that you can't build more on your rural property, then you consider you have a wipeout. And so I've never heard the discussion about coming back to the public sector, but there are things like system development charges. And I don't know if you guys know how many municipalities in Oregon use system development charges to assess. I mean, like when development is happening, you're going to pay a fee that will help cover the facilities and infrastructure needed for your development.
Chairs and Commissioner Newman, I don't know that number, but I will say though, there is an active conversation around how system development charges and that structure, the methodology by which they're calculated, are incentivizing or not particular types of housing. And I guess I'll have a little teaser. There's under a recent piece of legislation, the department's been directed to establish a statewide model system development charge methodology that will bring to the Land Conservation Development Commission for consideration at the end of 2027. So that process is just starting. I'm sure we'll get into all sorts of conversations. And if you ask me 1 year from now, I bet I'll know that STC city number.
I was like, I just wrote a check for $400,000 in STCs. I was like, that was a little bristled at that question. Any other commissioners? We're coming up on time, so if anybody has any pressing, Vice Chair Lazo.
Thanks, Chair. I thought of this earlier when we were talking, and it really came home when we were talking about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and the fundamental shift in the way we plan for housing. And what I was thinking earlier is there's actually there's a commonality that we have, that we're both managing a finite resource, land on one side and water on the other. But there's also a divergence in the way we're able to manage that because of the way the water rights systems work. In the underlying water rights, is that a correct assumption? We can't comprehensively plan for water in the same way because of senior water rights and these long-standing water rights. We can't just say, we want to dedicate this water to these other needs because these other rights exist. Whereas we can rezone things, we can reshape cities through zoning, but we can't do that with water. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair Lazo, or excuse me, Vice Chair Lazo. That's a great question. The principle of prior appropriation does provide a level of certainty to existing water right holders. And even through our efforts to update the integrated water resources strategy, create it, update it, we wanted to preserve the integrity of that because it provides a system of certainty to the most senior users. And so, yeah, in one respect, we can't completely overhaul the entire system, but some of the techniques and tools that Carrie highlighted, there are opportunities for individual water right holders to make adjustments to their existing water rights. They can convert from irrigated agriculture to an in-stream purpose. As Commissioner Wolf was mentioning earlier, split season, you can irrigate the earlier part of the season, but that water can be used in-stream for other purposes. So there's ways to tweak the system around the edges, I would say. I think with water resources planning, it's really something Oregon has lost in recent decades. For years, we conducted basin level comprehensive water resources planning. where we looked at all the water resources and determined what beneficial uses could be made, what were some of the pressures on the system. We haven't done that basin level water planning. Like you saw that map earlier with those different basins, that really ended in the late 80s, early 90s. What we're trying to do now, and we mentioned a bit earlier when we were talking, is help local communities that want to take a more integrated, holistic approach to water resources planning to help support that by being a partner at the table, providing data, providing funding, but really take a look at not just water and water supplies, but infrastructure, climate change, land use patterns, changing agricultural practice, a really holistic look. So yes, you're right. We can't completely throw the system out because it provides a level of certainty to water users, but we are trying to find ways to make adjustments and make the system more flexible and more holistic.
Nice. Thank you. Director Raymond.
Chair, if I might have an opportunity to close us out or to
Yes,
make
thank you.
a final statement. You've probably noticed this is really hard work. This is hard. This is hard stuff. These are difficult conversations and there's a lot to balance here. I personally wouldn't want to be working on anything else. I think this matters. And this is really the crux of who we are as a state and where we're going. I might be a little biased, but I just wanted to note, you're not going to find a more talented group of managers or senior staff at this table, in this room, or at these agencies anywhere else in the executive branch. If these folks can't figure it out, nobody can. So I am very optimistic. They're all in, they're smart, they're talented, they've got great folks around them as part of their staff. And I just wanted to acknowledge the very hard work that they're doing.
I would concur. I would say, I don't know how we can jointly speak together and close this meeting. But Vice Chair Smitherin, thank you for inviting us to your location. And this was a very fruitful conversation and obviously an already going on partnership, but we get to participate in it as commissioners with this meeting.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for coming. And I understand this might be your last meeting.
It is.
It is. So I think maybe another round of applause from our area. Thank you for your service and thank you for being a part of this very important discussion today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So with that, we will adjourn this portion of the meeting and we're going to have that photograph. We're going to redo that photograph. And then afterwards, we're going to lunch. Maybe somebody can say where? Upstairs. Upstairs. Okay. Thank you. I was like.